That night, Ethan Cole, a renowned criminal defense attorney in New York, stood frozen outside his 14-year-old son's bedroom door and heard the boy he had raised his entire life whisper, "Victor is my real father, and next week, he's going to make sure Dad disappears." In that moment, Ethan felt the world collapse in silence. A boating accident on the Hudson River, carefully staged, timed perfectly during a deposition break. The woman he had loved for 17 years. The friend he once trusted with his life. They had planned his death together. But there was one thing they couldn't buy. A father who didn't need blood to love his child as his own. A man who would turn the last 168 hours of his life into the worst nightmare for those who dared to touch his family. Stay with this story. And if you've ever been a father, stay until the end. I didn't react. Not right away. I stepped back from Liam's door like the floor had shifted under me. My body moved before my brain could catch up. Down the hallway, past the bookshelf I built with my own hands, into the kitchen, the same one Lauren remodeled last spring for better breakfast light. My fingers touched the edge of the granite counter. Cold, real, solid. Unlike everything else. I'd heard the words, but my body felt the meaning first. My shoulders collapsed slightly, like they'd been carrying a lie for years and just now realized it. My stomach clenched, not in fear, but in recognition. Because somewhere inside, I already knew. I'd seen the way Lauren smiled when Victor Hale's name came up at dinner. Too quick to defend, too quick to change the subject. I'd seen Liam's new watch, not a birthday gift from me. And Ava's Paris trip last summer. That wasn't a scholarship. I knew. My body had known long before my mind caught on. Now it was just math. 7 days. 2 children. 1 truth. And 1 man left standing. The next time I saw Victor Hale, he was holding a glass of Merlot and my wife's laughter. It was the Metropolitan Health Gala. One of those black tie evenings where the rich raise money for causes they secretly undermine by morning. He stood under a cascade of chandeliers at the plaza, dressed like old money and smiling like a man who believed the world owed him comfort. When Lauren spotted me across the room, her expression flickered, just for a second. Victor? He never flinched. He raised his glass like we were still classmates at Columbia, not this. I shook his hand, warm, dry, unapologetic. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "I hear your cross-examination last week practically dismembered the DA's case." "Sometimes the truth just needs a sharper knife," I replied. He laughed, too loud, too practiced. Lauren stepped in between us with a perfect wife smile. "Shall we grab a seat?" My mind cataloged everything. The Cartier bracelet on her wrist, the tilt of her body, closer to him, her fingers brushing his coat, not mine. Victor was charming, generous, lethal, and now, very likely, the biological father of both my children. The man had taken my wife, then my children, and now he was coming for my life. But he forgot who he was dealing with. I don't lose. Not without taking something with me. 3 nights later, I heard my daughter lie to me. Not the kind of lie you punish, the kind that hollows you out. I was pouring a scotch in the kitchen, lights low, the city humming through double-glazed windows, when I caught her voice in the hallway, hushed but clear. She was on the phone, with Victor. I knew it by the tone, that softness she didn't use with anyone else. "He's still clueless," Ava said. Then a pause. Then, I know. Just wait till after the deposition. It's almost over." Almost over. Like my life was a clock running out, and she was watching it tick. She didn't see me standing in the dark when she passed by, didn't smell the scotch, didn't feel the silence. That's how far she'd gone. And still, something in me refused to let go, because I'd taught her to ride a bike, to swim, to lie convincingly in mock trial club. If Victor had given her DNA, I had given her everything else. And if I had 168 hours left, I wasn't spending them mourning. I was going to spend them taking it all back, name by name, lie by lie. The next morning I woke up before the sun, not out of habit. I'd stopped sleeping properly years ago. But this time, it wasn't the usual courtroom stress or case backlog. This time, it was war. Lauren was still asleep beside me, peaceful as if she hadn't signed my death warrant with a wine-glossed smile. I stared at the ceiling fan turning above us, wondering how many times I'd been lied to in this bed. I rose, dressed quietly, skipped coffee, went straight to my study, the place where I used to prepare defenses. Today I was preparing an attack, I pulled out a burner phone I'd never used. New number. No cloud sync. I texted just one word. Ready? 5 minutes later, it pinged back, always. Lieutenant Maya Cortez, NYPD Organized Crime. She owed me favors, the kind that didn't expire. If anyone could dig up the past Victor tried to bury, it was her. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the Charlotte Hart case file, the girl no one talks about anymore. Dead during a summer program at Stanford. Victor had been there. No charges. No press. Just silence and a sealed report. But the dead don't stay buried when a lawyer stops playing defense. Her name was Charlotte Hart. She was 22 when she died. Or at least, that's what the report said. Accidental drowning. Campus pool. After hours. I remembered her because I'd spoken to her once. Columbia had sent me to Stanford for a summer legal fellowship. Victor was already there. Biotech internship. Something shiny enough for his resume. Charlotte was different. Smart, but with sharp edges. She didn't play nice with power. I remember seeing her one night at a campus mixer, holding a glass of something warm, laughing like she didn't trust the room. Victor had tried to impress her. She'd rolled her eyes. A week later, she was dead. Back then, I thought it was tragic. Now I think it was foreshadowing. I printed the autopsy. Drowning. No bruising. No drugs. But Maya texted within the hour. Maintenance door near the pool had card swipe entry. Guess who used his ID 12 mins before Charlotte died? Victor Hale. No investigation, no witnesses, no questions until now. I looked at her photo again. Charlotte Hart. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was evidence. And maybe, just maybe, she was where this whole damn story began. If Charlotte was where it began, then Diana was where it refused to end. Her older sister. Back then, just a 26-year-old grad student, grieving, ignored, shut out. Now, Diana Hart was a forensic data analyst for a private intelligence firm in D.C., still grieving. No longer quiet. I flew down the next morning. No lawyer badge, no briefcase. Just the truth, finally demanding to be told. We met at a coffee shop near Union Station. She didn't smile when she saw me. "You're late," she said. I sat down. "I think your sister didn't drown," I said quietly. She blinked once, then slid a flash drive across the table. "I've known that for 17 years, she said. "I just never had a lawyer on my side. Only men who thought Victor Hale was too powerful to touch." I held the flash drive in my palm like it was made of glass. It wasn't just files. It was everything Victor didn't want the world to see. "He took your sister," I said. "And now he's trying to take my children." She looked me straight in the eye. "Then let's take everything from him." I flew back to New York that night, flash drive in my coat pocket, rage in my bloodstream. The city looked different now. Every light from every skyscraper could have been someone Victor paid off. Every black SUV might have had someone inside waiting for me to slip. I wasn't paranoid. I was behind schedule. Back home, I found Liam on the balcony, headphones in, staring at the skyline like he was already planning his escape from all this. I didn't ask what he was listening to. Instead, I sat beside him, quiet, present. Then, without turning to me, he said, "You know, right?" I didn't answer. I just looked at him. He pulled a crumpled paper from his pocket. It was a DNA test, unofficial, swabbed from a coffee cup. No match. "I wanted to be wrong," he whispered. "But he's been messaging Ava, too, telling her she could study in Paris. He'd take care of it all." My jaw locked. Victor wasn't just trying to replace me in Lauren's bed. He was trying to erase me from my children's lives. Quietly, slowly, like an infection. He wasn't a rival. He was a usurper. And if I didn't cut him out fast, I wouldn't just lose my family. I'd lose who I was. By morning, the grief had calcified into strategy. I wasn't just going to survive Victor. I was going to make sure he never touched another family again. I called Diana. "You said you have financials?" She replied instantly. "Offshore accounts, shell companies. Start with one called Ravenshade Biotech out of Singapore. It's Hale's graveyard for dirty trials." I hung up and walked into my office. Not the law firm. My home office. The one Lauren never cared to ask about. Inside was a briefcase I hadn't touched since I testified before the State Bar Ethics Committee 10 years ago, when I defended a guilty man to protect an innocent child. Now I was defending my own. I pulled out my legal pad. Made 2 columns. Victor Hale, visible power. Victor Hale, hidden crimes. Then I opened a new burner phone. Texted Lieutenant Maya Cortez 2 words. Black warrants? She replied in less than a minute. You give me names, I'll get you shadows. It had begun. Not a trial, not a case, a dismantling. Victor had rewritten my family's story. I was going to redline every word. The first folder on the flash drive was labeled Heart Primary. No password, no encryption, just pain, organized like evidence. There were photos Charlotte had taken, lab results, spreadsheets, internal Hale memos, dates circled in red, a trial batch of an experimental neurodrug, codename G0. Victor had greenlit human testing before FDA approval. Patients died, 5, maybe 6. Charlotte had flagged it. And 72 hours later, she was floating face down in the Stanford Aquatic Center. Maya confirmed what Diana had always suspected. The local coroner was paid off, signed off without full tox screening, case sealed within a week. I stared at Charlotte's student ID photo on the screen. She couldn't have been older than Ava. The difference was, Ava still had time. Charlotte didn't. Victor had killed her to protect a patent. Now he was using that same poison, lies, leverage, money, to erase me. I wasn't just building a legal case. I was building a revenge story with an ending Victor didn't get to write. Charlotte was gone, but her truth was admissible. The more I studied Charlotte's case, the more I saw a pattern. Victor didn't kill with knives or guns. He used timing, isolation, and just enough doubt to make the truth look insane. Charlotte hadn't just stumbled on a deadly trial. She had planned to go public. Emails showed she reached out to a journalist, one who died in a car accident 2 weeks later. No story ever ran. Victor didn't silence people. He erased their context. He let them scream into empty rooms, then blamed their echo for the noise. And now he was doing it again. Only this time, I was the target. The depressed husband. The paranoid litigator. The jealous, controlling father who couldn't accept the truth. Lauren had already started rewriting the narrative, smiling at school events, posting carefully worded tributes online. The world was being warmed up for my exit, which meant I had to move faster, louder. I didn't need to convince the world yet. I only needed to convince one man to speak. The last person who ever saw Charlotte Hart alive, her old TA, now a junior exec at Hale Therapeutics. I picked up the phone and dialed. No lawyer, no subpoena, just my voice. And one chance to break the silence. His name was Reed Mathers. 20 years ago, he was a 24-year-old teaching assistant in the Stanford Biomedical Ethics program. Now, middle management at Hale Therapeutics, tucked safely in their compliance division, a fancy word for legal firewall. When he answered the phone, his voice had the same anxious edge I remembered from campus. I didn't bother with pleasantries. Reed, this is Ethan Cole. We met once. I'm calling about Charlotte Hart. Silence. Then a soft exhale, like a man being pulled out of deep water. I thought this day might come, he said quietly. I didn't need him to confess. Not yet. I needed him to remember. You saw her that night, didn't you? Another pause. Then, yes. She was scared. Said Victor threatened her if she went public. And after she died? They told me to shut up. Said if I talked, my academic career was over. I believed them. I didn't blame him. Victor knew how to pick his targets. Young, isolated, ambitious. But Reed wasn't a kid anymore, and neither was I. I'm not asking you to burn your life down, I told him. I'm asking you to help me save mine. Reed said nothing, then gave me his personal email. Send me what you have. If it matches what I saw, I'll testify. Click. It wasn't a win, but it was a crack, and all I needed was one to flood the whole damn house. By midnight, I was back in my study, building the wall Victor would eventually hit. On the left side of my whiteboard, Charlotte Hart, 2005, dead before deposition. On the right, Ethan Cole, 2025, set to accidentally drown during a legal recess. Different decades, same fingerprints, motive, silence, method, drowning, mastermind, Victor Hale. I pulled up the flash drive again and cross-referenced every name on Charlotte's original trial complaint with Hale's current executive board. 4 of the same people, including the company's current chief medical officer. I didn't need conspiracy theories. I had continuity. Same drug development tactics. Same ghost trials. Same willingness to eliminate anyone who spoke up. I sent it all to Reed Mathers. 2 hours later, he replied. A single line. You were right, I'll testify, but I want immunity. I forwarded the message to Lieutenant Maya Cortez, tagging it, Witness key. Connects Hart to current Hale ops. Request protective status. Within 15 minutes, she replied, Done. And Ethan, this just became federal. I leaned back, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days. Victor's fortress was still standing, but now there was a tunnel beneath it, and I wasn't alone anymore with the shovel. At 7:42 a.m., my phone buzzed. Not the burner, my real one. Unknown number. Manhattan area code, I answered. Mr. Cole? A clipped voice asked. This is Special Agent Millard, FBI. We have a sealed warrant to execute a property search related to financial misconduct. I paused. Whose misconduct? I asked. Yours, sir. 20 minutes later, they were in my midtown office. Black windbreakers, calm faces, gloves on, professionals. They walked past my framed Harvard law diploma like it was a fake passport. I didn't flinch. Because I already knew what they would find. Last week, Victor's team planted documents on my firm's secure server. Doctored transfers, shell company links, accounts I never opened. I hadn't stopped it. I'd let it happen. Why? Because Diana had built a honeypot, a forensic trap buried beneath the faked documents. Every time someone accessed them, it logged the IP. One of those IPs traced back to a private equity firm, wholly owned by Victor Hale. As Agent Millard unplugged my hard drive, I looked him in the eye. You're about to discover something interesting, I said. He raised an eyebrow. I didn't create this mess, I told him, but I built the map out. Because this wasn't a defense anymore. This was bait. And Victor Hale? He'd already bitten. By noon, I was sitting across from Agent Millard in an FBI interrogation room downtown. No cuffs, no threats, just a table, a folder, and a man trying to figure out if I was the suspect or the architect. He opened the folder and slid a printout across to me. 3 offshore wires totaling $12 million, all routed through a shell in Belize under your name. I didn't even blink. Check the metadata, I said. Timestamp doesn't match any known activity from my terminal, but it does match a keystroke log we recovered from Victor Hale's compliance team. Millard studied me. You're saying you were framed. No, I corrected. I'm saying I was baited. They assumed I'd panic, hire a lawyer, plead out. Instead, I let the fraud unfold. And now I have IP logs, document hashes, and 3 insider witnesses ready to flip. I slid him a drive. Hale's entire offshore architecture, built on Charlotte Hart's silence, sustained by mine. That ends today. Millard sat back, quiet. I need federal protection for 2 witnesses, Diana Hart and Reed Mathers, and I want Judge Alan Whitaker to oversee the pretrial motions. He's the only one Victor doesn't own. He didn't say yes. He didn't say no, but he did reach for a recorder and hit start. In chess, sometimes the best way to trap a king is to let him think you've blundered your queen. It had been 10 years since I last stood in Judge Alan Whitaker's chambers. Back then, I was a defense attorney pulling miracles out of legal mud. He was the one judge who never let me get away with it. Smart, stern, and allergic to bullshit. The kind of man Victor Hale couldn't buy because he had already buried a child of his own. That mattered now. When I walked into his office, I didn't bring a brief. I brought names. Charlotte Hart, Reed Mathers, Diana Hart. Then I said the only name that made the room colder. Victor Hale. He didn't interrupt, didn't blink, just leaned back, folded his hands, and let me speak. I told him everything. Not just about the offshore accounts, the falsified documents, or the cover-ups, but about the next part, how Victor wasn't just erasing me. He was repositioning himself, using his philanthropic fund to quietly buy favor with media outlets, politicians, even sitting judges. How close is he to the DA? Whitaker asked. Close enough that I don't trust anyone else with this. He nodded once. You'll file your motion under seal. I'll authorize sealed witness protection for Diana and Mathers. But if you're wrong, Ethan, this burns you alive. If I'm wrong, I'm already dead, I said. He didn't smile, but he stood. Then let's make it official. That was the moment everything stopped being strategy. It became war protocol. And Judge Whitaker had just given me the first real battlefield. I called him just after midnight. No signal tracing, no record, just a direct line. The one only a handful of people had, buried in a drawer of my old contacts. He answered on the second ring. Ethan, he said. Smooth, familiar. like we still shared cigars after Columbia finals, like he hadn't tried to replace my children, erase my marriage, and engineer my death. "You've been busy," I said. He chuckled. That smug little inhale he always used when he thought he'd won. "You know how it is," Victor replied. "Big moves require precision." "And murder?" I asked quietly. "That just part of the model now?" He paused. "Careful, Ethan. You've always had a talent for jumping to conclusions." "Not conclusions," I said. "Evidentiary trails, 5 names, 3 accounts, 1 body. I'm sure you remember Charlotte Hart." Silence. Then finally his tone shifted. Just a hair. Not fear. Not guilt. Annoyance. "You should have stayed in courtrooms," he said coldly. "Now you're in waters you don't understand." "Oh, I understand them," I replied. "I just swim differently than you." He was about to speak, but I cut him off. "You made a mistake, Victor. You assumed I'd die quietly, but I don't do anything quietly." I hung up. He would scramble now. He would clean files, call lawyers, threaten witnesses. Good. Panic was the first stage of collapse. And I'd just lit the fuse. The Plaza Hotel, Manhattan, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, waiters gliding like ghosts, and every table lined with the city's elite, donors, CEOs, political climbers, and media darlings. Tonight's theme? Innovation in medical ethics. The irony burned so hard I almost laughed. At the center of it all, of course, was Victor Hale, smiling, toasting, shaking hands with the governor, and beside him, Lauren, hair curled, eyes cold, wearing the same Cartier bracelet I'd once given her, now reset with diamonds, Victor added. I watched them from the balcony above the ballroom, invisible in a tailored black suit, earpiece in my left ear. On the other end, Diana in the surveillance van parked across Fifth Avenue, voice calm, eyes everywhere. "All hidden cams are live, audio clean," she said. "Maya is 10 minutes out with the feds. Once you trigger the speech, we go." I nodded, looked down at the crowd, looked at my daughter, Ava, laughing at something Victor whispered. She didn't know. Not yet. But tonight wouldn't end in laughter. Tonight was the turning point, because we weren't just going to indict Victor in a courtroom. We were going to bury him in the spotlight he craved, and let the whole damn city see what kind of man he really was. I stepped onto the stage like I belonged there. No one stopped me. Not security, not Victor, not even Lauren. Because on paper, I was still a co-sponsor of the evening, and legally, still her husband. The MC hesitated when I took the mic, but I gave him the nod lawyers give when they've already cleared the room behind the curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, smiling like I meant it, "I know we're here to honor innovation, compassion, integrity in medicine, but I believe true ethics begins with transparency." I saw Victor tense 2 tables away, glass in hand, smile frozen. Lauren stiffened beside him, eyes narrowing, so I continued. "Tonight I'd like to share a story about a young woman named Charlotte Hart, a brilliant mind, an idealist, and someone who tried to expose a medical trial that wasn't just unethical, it was criminal." I tapped my earpiece twice. Behind me the screen came to life. Surveillance footage, emails, bank wires, medical records, all tied together with one common name, Victor Hale. The room fell silent. "You may know him as a philanthropist, but I know him as the man who tried to kill me last week." Gasps, chairs scraping, cameras flashing. Victor stood now, face pale, but trying to hold power in his posture. Too late. I looked right at him. "You tried to replace me, erase me, but you forgot, Victor. I don't lose. I build cases." That's when the ballroom doors flew open, and Lieutenant Maya Cortez walked in, followed by the FBI. "Time's up," the moment Lieutenant. Maya Cortez entered. Everything shifted. Her badge glinted under the ballroom lights like a sword unsheathed. Behind her, 2 federal agents. Behind them, a silence thicker than disbelief. "Victor Hale," Maya called out, voice clear, cutting through the murmurs like a verdict. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and obstruction of justice." Victor didn't run. He wasn't the type. He smoothed his suit jacket, the same one he wore to my son's birthday party 6 months ago, and glanced at the crowd like he could still win them back with charm. "I want my lawyer," he said, calm as ever. "You already paid most of them off," I replied, "but don't worry, I've got plenty of receipts." As the agents moved in, He locked eyes with me. There was no fury, no panic, only one thing: calculation. Even in handcuffs, Victor was running the next scenario in his mind. Court angles, PR spins, alternate assets, escape routes. But this wasn't just a takedown, it was exposure. And the one thing he couldn't recover from was being seen. Behind me, the screen continued to roll. Charlotte's name, Reed's statement, Diana's files, even footage from the accidental drowning Victor arranged for me, intercepted, decrypted, and projected for all. The room wasn't just watching, it was turning. Donors backed away from him. Politicians checked their phones. Lauren sat frozen, mascara cracking like old paint. And then I said one last thing, just for him. "You stole my family. You tried to erase my name. Now the world will remember yours," as a cautionary tale. The agents walked him past me. He didn't look back, because even Victor knew this was the end of the empire. The ballroom emptied slowly, the kind of silence that follows a storm people pretend didn't drench them. No applause, no closing toast, just whispers, the kind that echo into courtrooms and boardrooms for years. I stood alone for a moment, the projector still looping Victor's lies on a silent reel behind me. Charlotte's face frozen on screen, mid-laugh, the last time she trusted the world. Then I saw Lauren, still seated at their table, her wine untouched, her hand trembling slightly as she reached for her phone, then stopped. She looked at me like she wanted to speak, but what could she possibly say? I didn't know wouldn't survive cross-examination. I didn't mean to, wouldn't survive my memory. We locked eyes, not as husband and wife, not even as enemies, just as two people who once built something, and stood now in its ruins. I turned away before she could speak. Ava and Liam were near the back of the room, both pale, both shaken. Liam's eyes locked on mine, searching for something between relief and resentment. I walked toward them slowly. I didn't have answers, only the truth, and the truth always costs something. Liam spoke first. "Is it over?" I looked past him, toward the cameras still rolling, the agents still collecting, the reporters already salivating. "No," I said, "but it's finally started." We rode home in silence. The black car cut through the city like a slow, deliberate blade, past the plaza, past the courthouse, past the streets that used to mean normal life. Ava stared out the window, earbuds in, but I knew the music wasn't playing. She just didn't want to talk. Liam sat beside me, arms crossed, jaw tight. He wasn't angry. He was processing, all of it. Their mother, Victor, me. When we pulled up to the brownstone, the porch light was still on, as if the house didn't know the family inside had cracked in half. They walked in ahead of me. I lingered at the door, watching the backs of the people I used to tuck in at night. My chest ached, not with pride or vengeance or even victory, with loss. You don't win back a family with an arrest. You don't rebuild trust with evidence. That night I sat at the kitchen table alone, the place where I once taught Liam to write his first closing argument, where Ava once told me she wanted to be a journalist. I opened my notebook. On one side, Victor Hale, indicted, case pending, federal hold. On the other side, Lauren, gone. Ava, silent. Liam, maybe. Not everything broken ends in prison. Some things just remain broken. But I wasn't done yet. There were still pieces worth saving. The next morning the house was quiet. No footsteps, no clinking dishes, no morning sarcasm from Liam or half-awake humming from Ava. Just the ticking wall clock, steady as law. I brewed coffee out of habit, not need. The ritual felt like the only thing that hadn't been rewritten. I was mid-sip when Ava finally came downstairs. Sweater 3 sizes too big, hair in a bun, eyes red, not from crying but from holding too much in. She didn't look at me, just opened the fridge and stood there staring into it like something inside might explain the last 24 hours. Then, without turning, she said, "Did you know the whole time?" I set my mug down slowly. "No," I said, "not until it was almost too late." She closed the fridge. Still no eye contact. "You let him into our lives," she whispered. "He sat at our dinner table." "I let a lot of things happen," I admitted. Some because I trusted, some because I didn't want to believe what I saw. Finally, she looked at me. "I don't know if I forgive you," she said. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "I just want to make sure you never have to ask yourself the questions I avoided." She nodded once. no smile, no hug, but she didn't walk away. Sometimes, in a war like this, that's the only win you get that day, and it's enough to keep breathing. By noon, Liam was gone, not with bags or slammed doors, just gone. Left a note. Went to mom's, need space, I'm not angry. I'm just tired. I read it 3 times, then folded it neatly, placing it in the same drawer where his kindergarten drawings still lived. Funny how you spend years protecting someone's future, only for them to walk away with pieces of your past. But I didn't chase him, because sometimes distance isn't betrayal, it's survival. I returned to the war I could still fight. Victor's arraignment was scheduled for Monday morning, but word was already spreading. 2 board members at Hale Therapeutics had resigned. A whistleblower hotline was opened overnight. Investors were pulling out. Stock price down 38%. He was bleeding. Finally, I pulled up the press draft Diana had sent. Title: The Dead Don't Lie. How Charlotte Hart Exposed a Pharma Empire from the Grave. It was bold, unapologetic, accurate, but I made one change before sending it to the editor. I added a second byline, by Diana Hart and Ethan Cole, because truth needs witnesses, and survivors need each other more than revenge. I hit send, then closed the laptop. The house was still quiet, but for the first time in weeks, the door didn't feel locked from the inside. Sunday night. My suit was laid out. Notes were reviewed, but I couldn't sleep. It wasn't nerves, it was clarity, the kind that keeps you awake because your mind finally stopped spinning and started aiming. Victor Hale would stand before a judge in the morning, but I wasn't interested in a guilty plea. I wanted something rarer, humiliation. I needed the court to see not just the crimes, but the structure that protected them, the corporate machine, the silent partners, the enablers who profited from every silenced voice, every erased victim, which meant I had one final move to make. I called Reed Mathers. "Are you ready?" I asked. He hesitated. "I don't want to lose everything." "You already lost your silence," I said. "That's the most dangerous part. The rest is survivable." He exhaled. "I'll be there," he said. Then I made one last call, not to Diana, not to Maya, to Nathan Hale, Victor's estranged son, a name I hadn't spoken in a decade. He answered after 2 rings, his voice dry but alert. "Why now?" he asked. "Because I don't want your father's legacy to be your inheritance." Silence. Then, "I'll think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. And sometimes, when you're taking down an empire, all you need is one name, choosing not to protect the one who built it. Monday, 9:01 a.m. Southern District of New York. Courtroom 6B. Victor sat at the defense table flanked by 2 of the most expensive attorneys Manhattan could offer. Polished, confident, deeply unaware they were defending a man who no longer had a kingdom. He looked different today, hair slightly out of place, tie too perfect, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked small. I entered quietly, brief in hand, no media escort. I wasn't here to perform. I was here to win. Judge Whitaker entered. The gallery rose. The room settled into that tense stillness reserved for high-profile cases, the kind where no one speaks above a whisper, and even silence feels cross-examined. The clerk read the charges. Fraud, obstruction, conspiracy, attempted murder. Victor didn't blink, just leaned toward his lawyer and whispered something. I watched Whitaker's eyes. He didn't flinch either, didn't look at Victor like a monster or a mogul. He looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a tumor, calm, clinical, ready to remove it. When he called for opening remarks, the U.S. attorney began with a line that hit like a gavel. "This is not just a case about corporate greed. It is a case about the machinery of silence and the people who finally stopped it." I felt Diana's hand on my shoulder, light, brief. She had slipped into the row behind me unnoticed. We weren't the only ones anymore. Reed Mathers sat near the aisle, nervously flipping his witness subpoena, and in the back row, almost hidden beneath a plain black baseball cap, I saw him. Nathan Hale, his father's name, my final witness. The empire had walked into its own funeral, and I brought the whole guest list. Cross-examinations hadn't even started, and Victor Hale was already bleeding credibility. The prosecution's opening was brutal, a timeline built like a guillotine. Charlotte Hart's death, the buried clinical trials, the falsified offshore transfers, photos, documents, testimony previews, all of it lined up like a string of corpses with Victor's name on the toe tag. But what truly landed wasn't just the evidence. It was the pattern. The assistant U.S. attorney turned toward the gallery and said, "This wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was a system, and this man was its architect." Victor sat motionless. But I saw it, the twitch in his jaw, the subtle shift in his fingers. The lion didn't roar. He braced. When the prosecution introduced Reed Mather's statement into evidence, a murmur rippled through the gallery. But what froze the courtroom was when the recording played. Victor's voice, captured in a call months prior, buried on a secure line, recovered from Diana's forensic team. She should have kept her mouth shut. That's on her. Charlotte Hart. Her name hung in the room like smoke, and no one, not even Victor's high-priced lawyers, moved to object. He had said it, in his own voice, on tape. The judge called for recess, but the damage was already done. Victor stood, straightened his cuffs, and glanced toward the gallery. Our eyes met. He didn't smirk, didn't nod. He just looked tired, like a man who finally realized the walls weren't closing in. They had already closed. When court resumed, the room felt different. It wasn't just the press, or the security, or the whispers swelling behind every pause. It was something heavier, something quieter, shame. Even Victor's own attorneys shifted in their seats when the next name was read into the record, Charlotte Eleanor Hart. I didn't flinch, but Victor did, subtly, like someone slapped him in a dream. The prosecution introduced the forensic reconstruction of her original complaint, redacted emails, time-stamped memos, and the internal Hale Therapeutics presentation she was never meant to see. Slide after slide, Victor's signature, his approval, and then, proceed to phase 2, media risk minimal, heart threat classified as internal noise. The courtroom didn't gasp, they recoiled, and then came the final nail. Diana Hart took the stand. She was composed, controlled, not dramatic, just devastating. She told the jury what it felt like to bury a sister no one fought for, to scream into a system that deleted the names it found inconvenient, and to open an email 15 years later that said simply, "We found the file, are you ready?" She pointed at Victor. "That man built his empire on silence, but my sister didn't die quietly, and today she's testifying through me." Victor didn't look at her, but I did, because justice isn't loud, it's patient, precise, and when it finally speaks, it does so in the voice of the people who refuse to be forgotten. Victor's lawyers didn't cross-examine Diana. They didn't dare. Because what could they say? That she was grieving too clearly? That she'd waited too long to speak? The jury didn't need to be persuaded anymore. They needed closure. And Diana had delivered it. Without vengeance. Without spectacle. Just facts. Grief. Proof. Victor kept his eyes forward the whole time. Like if he stared hard enough at the bench, it would all rewind. But it wouldn't. Because Reed Mathers took the stand next, and Reed didn't just confirm the documents. He gave them something Victor had never imagined possible, a betrayal from the inside. Reed told them about the closed-door meetings, about the silence money bought, about the girl who drowned in front of a system that had been told to look away. "Victor Hale didn't need to threaten me," Reed said. "He didn't need to say a word. He made you feel like if you crossed him, you'd disappear, and if you obeyed, you'd rise." Then he looked directly at Victor. I rose, and I've hated myself for it every day since. Victor still didn't react, but I saw his fingers curl slightly, like he was trying to grip onto the last thread of control. He had played God for 20 years, and now, for the first time, he was just a man in a chair, listening to a door close behind him. When the clerk called my name, the room stilled. Ethan Cole, sworn in, seated. Not as a lawyer, not as a victim, just as a man who refused to vanish. The prosecutor gave me space, no theatrics, just a single nod. My story was already in the file. Now, it needed to be heard. I took a breath. Then I began. For most of my adult life, I believed justice came from argument, from precedent, from rules. I was wrong. I let that sit. Justice doesn't live in the courtroom. It survives in the people who carry it when the courtroom fails. Charlotte Hart carried it, Diana, Reed, my children, and eventually, I did too. I looked directly at Victor Hale. This man sat at my dinner table. He took my trust. He tried to take my family, and when that wasn't enough, he tried to take my life. But what he failed to understand is that men like me, we don't need DNA to be fathers. We don't need sympathy to stand. And we don't need revenge to win. I paused. looked at the jury, every face locked in. "We just need the truth, and now you have it." The judge nodded. The prosecutor rested. Victor didn't look at me. He stared at the floor. And I knew, in that moment, the verdict was already forming, not just on paper, but in history. Because this wasn't about guilt. This was about memory. And now, the truth had a name again. The verdict didn't come that day. The judge adjourned, the jury filed out. The cameras outside exploded with noise, reporters yelling questions into wind, headlines already half written. Inside the courthouse it was quieter, but not calmer. Victor was led out a side door by marshals. No cuffs, not yet. That came later, if the jury did what we prayed they would. I walked past Lauren in the hallway. She didn't speak, neither did I. What was there left to say? This wasn't about betrayal anymore. This was the reckoning after betrayal, when the truth has already burned everything down and you're both left standing in ash you helped create. Outside, a wall of microphones waited, but I didn't stop. Diana followed me, Reed too, not out of duty, out of shared gravity. We'd told our story. Now the world would decide what it meant. I looked at the courthouse steps, remembering the day I was sworn in, suit too tight, hope in my chest, thinking justice was a structure built on order. Now I knew better. Justice wasn't a building. It was a fight. A slow, grinding, soul-taxing war that only ends when someone refuses to stay quiet. I stepped into the sunlight. The cameras flashed. And for the first time in years, I didn't flinch. The sun was sharp, the kind that makes everything look too real. Microphones stretched toward me like metal fingers. Cameras blinked. Reporters shouted my name. "Mr. Cole, is it true Victor Hale threatened your life directly? Were your children aware of what was happening? Is this justice, or is this revenge?" I didn't answer, because they weren't asking for answers. They were asking for angles. And this story didn't belong to headlines anymore. It belonged to the dead, to the betrayed, to the ones still breathing in the fallout. Diana stood beside me, clutching her press badge, unreadable. Reed lingered behind, eyes low, the guilt not gone, just quieter. I stepped up to the mic anyway, just for one moment, one line, no press statement, no legal jargon. Charlotte Hart didn't have a voice when it mattered, so we spoke, and now the world listened. I stepped down, not because I was finished, but because it wasn't my story alone anymore. As I turned to leave, I saw Nathan Hale across the street, still in his cap, arms folded, face unreadable. He didn't wave, but he nodded, and I knew what it meant. The bloodline wouldn't carry the lie. Not this time. Some names get buried with legacy. Others are rewritten with truth. And today, we'd started that rewrite. That night, the house creaked. Not from ghosts, just from memory. I stood in the hallway outside Ava's room, staring at the photos still taped to her door. Paris, her sketchbook, one from when she was 9, gap-toothed, holding a mock trial trophy I'd pretended not to cry over. The door opened slowly. She stood there in pajama pants, arms crossed, tired, guarded, still my daughter. "Is it over?" she asked. I wanted to say yes. Instead I said, "The worst part is..." She studied me. "Does that mean he's going to jail?" I nodded. "If the jury does what I think they will, yes, for a long time." She looked down. "And Mom?" That word still hit like a bruise. "She made her choices," I said. "But she wasn't the one who tried to kill me, or rewrite your life." "I know," Ava whispered. Then, after a beat, "Still feels like I lost both of them." I wanted to fix that, to offer her something whole, but all I had were pieces, so I held out my hand. She didn't take it at first, but then she did. No hug, no tears, just skin against skin, contact. And in this house where truth once nearly died in silence, that counted as healing. Even broken homes remember how to hold the light, if you leave the door open long enough. The next morning, Liam still hadn't come home. No texts, no calls, no slammed doors, just distance, thick and deliberate. I didn't want to push, but silence, left unchecked, becomes the next lie. So I got in the car, drove across town to Lauren's apartment, the one Victor had helped her lease 6 months ago. I didn't text ahead, didn't knock twice. When she opened the door, she didn't speak, just stepped aside. Liam was on the couch, hoodie up, controller in hand, eyes locked on a paused screen. He didn't look up. "Hey," I said. He didn't answer. I sat down on the edge of the coffee table, hands clasped. Let the silence stretch. Then I said it. "I'm not here to win. I'm here to stay." He put the controller down. "I don't know how to look at you," he muttered. "After everything." "You don't have to look at me," I replied. "You just have to know I'm looking out for you." He stared at the floor. "You were supposed to protect us." "I failed," I said without defense. "But I fought back, and I'll keep fighting, even if you don't forgive me." A long pause. Then he asked quietly, "Was it real? All of it? The story?" I nodded. Every word. He didn't speak again. But when I stood to leave, he said, "You can come by tomorrow, if you want." I didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded. Because when a son opens a door a second time, you don't rush through it. You earn it. The next morning, I showed up with bagels, not because Liam asked, because I remembered he liked sesame, because Ava used to steal the poppy seed ones, because sometimes you rebuild a life by repeating the smallest things. Liam let me in without a word. He didn't rush to greet me, but he didn't disappear either. He sat at the counter, scrolling, hoodie off this time. Progress. I set the bag on the table, grabbed 2 plates, and waited. "I read the article," he finally said, eyes still on his phone. "The one Diana published?" I asked. He nodded. "She didn't hold back. She never does." He glanced at me. "You really almost died?" "Closer than I ever told you." A pause. "You should have told us earlier." "I should have done a lot of things earlier," I said, "but I was too busy surviving." He looked up at that. First real eye contact in days. "You're not surviving anymore?" he asked. I thought about it, about the trial, about Victor, about the quiet in the house that still didn't feel like home. "I'm trying something harder," I said. "Staying." He reached for a bagel, bit into it, said nothing. But he didn't leave the room. And for now, that was enough. For the first time in months, my phone didn't buzz before sunrise. No subpoenas, no death threats, no encrypted files waiting for decryption. Just quiet. The kind I hadn't trusted in a long time. I walked into the kitchen. Liam was already there, halfway through a bowl of cereal, hair messy, face softer. Ava followed 10 minutes later. She didn't say good morning. She just grabbed coffee, sat, and started sketching in her notebook. No tension, no forced smiles, just life. I realized something standing there. For months I'd been fighting to stay alive. Now I had to learn how to exist again. Not as Ethan Cole, the lawyer. Not as the man who exposed Victor Hale. Just as Dad. The kind who remembers how his daughter takes her coffee. The kind who knows his son likes silence more than lectures. The kind who doesn't check the locks 3 times before bed. Later that afternoon, I stood in my study, the same room where this whole war had started. I opened the drawer where I once kept classified files, burner phones, flash drives with names on them. I pulled it all out. Every artifact of the man I'd become to survive. And I put it in a box. Labeled it, "Not who I am, not anymore." Because the story that tried to end me was over, and the one worth living was just beginning. The mail arrived late. A small stack, junk, bills, and 1 envelope with no return address. Thick paper, old-fashioned seal. I almost tossed it. Then I saw the initials embossed on the flap, N.H. Nathan Hale. Inside was a single handwritten note, neat, deliberate. No signature, just this. "He taught me to lie. You taught me to listen. If you ever need someone to tell the truth in a room full of people paid not to, I'll show up." I read it twice, then once more. He wasn't offering friendship. He was offering witness. Proof that even in the darkest bloodlines, truth could still root itself. I tucked the letter into my notebook, the one that used to be filled with case notes and death dates. Now it held names I wanted to protect, not prosecute. I sat down at the piano, dusty, untouched since before the storm began. Ava walked past the doorway, paused. "You still remember how to play?" "Only the stuff no one likes," she smirked. "Perfect. I hate the stuff everyone likes." I started to play something quiet, hesitant. She didn't leave. Liam came down a minute later and stood at the banister, listening. And in that moment, with no headlines, no courtrooms, no enemies left to outmaneuver, I realized something I hadn't dared believe in months. We were still a family, not whole, not healed, but here, together, still making noise. The next morning I made breakfast. Not because it was a holiday, not because someone needed cheering up, just because I could. Eggs, toast, orange juice. The kind of meal that used to be background noise in our house, the prelude to backpacks and rushed exits. Ava walked in first, hair still wet from a shower, notebook already under her arm. She paused when she saw the table. "You okay?" she asked, squinting like I'd grown a second head. "I think so," I said. "Is that allowed?" She shrugged. "Depends on the eggs." Liam followed. He didn't say much, just sat, poured juice, and started eating. I didn't try to force a moment, didn't ask how they were feeling, didn't mention Victor, or Lauren, or the trial. We just ate. Halfway through, Ava looked up. "You still going to court tomorrow?" I nodded. "Sentencing. Judge Whitaker called. Wants final statements from all sides." "You going to speak?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you going to tear him apart?" I took a breath, thought about it, then said quietly, "No, I'm going to let the truth stand on its own. I already won the fight. Now I want to win something better." Liam looked up at that, just for a second. But it was enough, because in this house, healing didn't come with big speeches. It came with eggs, eye contact, and the fight to show up without armor. Tuesday, 8:47 a.m. sentencing day. I stood outside courtroom 3A, the hallway quiet except for the low murmur of press behind the barricades. No flashing cameras today. No chaos. Just the final act of a story no one wanted to believe, until we made them. Victor Hale would be sentenced within the hour. Inside, I could already feel the air had changed. He was no longer the man they feared. He was the man they'd watched unravel, piece by piece, lie by lie. I stepped inside, took my seat in the gallery. Diana was there. So was Reed. And to my surprise, in the very back row, Nathan Hale, no hat this time, just a suit, and the eyes of a man who'd survived legacy like shrapnel. Victor was led in, wrists cuffed, not defiant, not broken, just quiet. For the first time, he looked like someone who knew it was over. Judge Whitaker began with the formalities, charges, impact statements, a final summary of the court's findings. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Cole, you may speak if you wish." I stood, walked to the front, no paper in hand, no speech, just one memory, Charlotte's voice on that last voicemail. "I hope one day someone believes me. That's all I want. Just one person." So I said, "This sentence isn't just for what Victor Hale did. It's for who the world let him become. But today, that ends, because we believed her. And belief is how you bring someone back into the world, even if they're gone." I turned, looked not at Victor, but at the gallery, at the survivors. This isn't closure, this is continuance, and the rest belongs to history now. I sat down. The judge reached for the gavel, and Victor Hale, once untouchable, braced for the sound that would define the rest of his life. The gavel fell, one sharp crack, like a rifle shot in a church. "Victor Hale," Judge Whitaker declared, voice calm, steel-wrapped, unshakable. "You are hereby sentenced to 38 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole." No gasps, no sobs, just the kind of silence that feels earned. I looked at Victor. He didn't flinch, didn't plead, didn't look at me, because the real sentence wasn't the years. It was the truth, carved into public record, permanent, unrevisable. The empire, gone. As the marshals escorted him away, I saw Nathan Hale stand in the back row. He didn't speak, didn't blink, just watched his father disappear through a door that no longer opened outward. And then, quietly, he left. I stood in the hallway after, hands in pockets, nothing left to fight. Reporters hovered, but none approached. Not today. Diana joined me. She didn't speak either, just handed me a folded piece of paper. Charlotte's original statement, the one they buried. I took it, slipped it in my coat, close to my chest. "Come by the house tonight," I said softly. "We're cooking." She smiled, tired, real. "You?" "Okay, Ava's cooking. I'm pretending to help." That made her laugh. And that sound was the real ending. Not the gavel, not the sentence. The laugh of someone who survived. That was the first note of the next chapter. And this time, We were going to write it together. That night the house felt different, not healed, not whole, but warm. Ava was in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, yelling at Liam about oversalting the pasta. He claimed sabotage. She claimed incompetence. It felt normal. Diana arrived just before 7. She brought wine and something homemade that looked like bread but smelled like apology. We didn't say much at first, just passed plates, clinked glasses, shared a meal the world didn't need to hear about. Halfway through dinner, Ava asked, "Did she really write that statement alone?" Diana nodded. "In one night. She never edited a word." I pulled it from my coat pocket, Charlotte's original testimony, folded, ink slightly faded, a piece of history disguised as paper. Ava reached out for it. I hesitated, then let it go. She read it at the table, silently. When she reached the last line, "Even if no one listens, I will have said it," her eyes didn't tear up, but her voice did. "She shouldn't have had to write this alone." "She didn't," Diana said gently. "Not anymore." There was an empty chair beside her. No one mentioned it, but we all knew whose it was. Charlotte Hart. Not a ghost, not a victim, a presence. And as Ava folded the letter and placed it carefully on the table, I realized this wasn't about justice anymore. This was about belonging, and the promise that no one else we loved would ever be left unheard again. After dinner, the dishes stayed in the sink. We all migrated to the living room, plates still half full, wine glasses clutched like anchors. The kind of night where time doesn't move in hours, just in glances, silences, unfinished sentences. Liam sat on the floor, back against the couch, thumbing through an old photo album I didn't know we still had. Ava leaned over his shoulder. "Was that the lake house trip?" she asked, pointing to a blurry shot of her at age 9, mid-cannonball. "Right before Dad made us argue about the Constitution for marshmallows." "You won," I said. "You let me win. I don't let anyone win." Diana sat in the corner chair, quiet, watching, her eyes scanning the walls, the books, the framed degrees I hadn't taken down, but she wasn't looking for Victor or Charlotte. She was locating herself in the new space. Eventually she asked, "What are you going to do now?" I didn't have an answer, because the fight was over, the trial done, the monster gone. But identity doesn't just snap back after survival. It rebuilds, awkwardly, unevenly, like scar tissue that still remembers where the wound used to be. "I don't know," I said, "but I'm not going back. To law, to who I was, to who I—" The room went quiet again, not heavy, just aware. Then Liam looked up. "You could teach." I blinked. He shrugged. "You already taught me how to argue, and not die." Ava added, "You'd be terrifying, but probably really good." Diana smiled. "It's not the worst idea." I looked around, at my children, at the woman who refused to bury her sister's name, at the house that still smelled faintly like burnt garlic, and for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt held. Maybe teaching wasn't just about cases and rules. Maybe it was about showing people how to stay standing after the world tried to knock them down. Maybe this was what stayed behind when the trial ends. Not silence, not shame, but something worth passing on. I woke up just after 6. No nightmares, no late-night texts, no voice in my head rehearsing testimony, just the sound of birds, and a house that didn't feel like a bunker anymore. I sat at the edge of the bed, letting the stillness settle in my chest. For months, my mornings had started with instinct. Check the locks, check the headlines, check if Victor had moved a piece I missed. But now, he was gone. And the only thing moving was the light cutting through the blinds, soft and warm across the floor. Downstairs, the coffee was already brewing. Ava had left a note. "Early class. Don't touch my sketchbook. Again." I smiled. Progress. Liam's door was cracked open. I peeked in. He was still asleep, headphones around his neck, some documentary about whistleblowers still playing on his laptop. That was new. I poured coffee, sat by the window, opened my notebook, the same one that once held Victor's paper trail, flight manifests, Charlotte's decrypted files. Now it held blank pages. And for the first time in a year, that didn't feel terrifying. It felt like a chance. I wrote just one thing at the top of the page. Justice is not the end of the story. It's the point where healing finally gets a voice. I closed the notebook. Today wasn't about proving anything. It wasn't about punishment or survival. It was about living, quietly, honestly, and with intention. And somehow, in the echo left behind by everything I lost, I could finally hear what remained. Peace, not loud, not perfect, but mine. Later that morning, I walked past the courthouse, not to testify, not to fight, not even out of habit, just because. It was strange seeing it from the outside without adrenaline in my blood. The columns looked softer, the steps smaller, like the building had shrunk since the last time I stood on those stairs. Across the street, a woman pushed a stroller. A man handed out flyers. Life, moving forward, without needing my permission. I bought a coffee from a cart I used to pass every morning on trial days. The vendor squinted. "You that guy from TV?" I nodded. "Sometimes." He handed me the coffee. "No offense, man, but you looked dead back then. Now, you look quieter." I laughed. "That's the goal." Back home, I cleared out my office. Not the files. Those had been boxed weeks ago. The photos, framed wins, signed verdicts, plaques with my name in gold foil, trophies from a life that felt like someone else's. I didn't throw them out, just packed them away. In their place, I hung something Ava had drawn. It was simple, a sketch of our house, but every window had light. And in the top right corner, barely visible, Charlotte's initials in tiny script. I stared at it for a long time, not because it was perfect, but because it reminded me what matters. Not the cases you win, but the people you come home to. And for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where that was. It started with a phone call. Fordham Law, the dean himself. He'd followed the trial, read the transcripts, read Diana's article 3 times. "You interested in teaching?" he asked. "Not full-time. Just come talk to a room that still believes courtroom wins are about who yells loudest." I almost said no. But then I remembered Liam's voice just days earlier. "You already taught me how to argue and not die." So I said yes. 1 week later, I stood in front of 60 students, blazers, laptops, bright eyes with no idea how dark the law could get. I didn't bring slides, didn't rehearse. I just told them a story about a man who trusted the wrong people, about a woman who died for telling the truth, about the war between justice on paper and justice in blood. I told them what it cost, not in billable hours, but in family, in silence, in almost losing everything that mattered. Then I asked them one question. What will you do when the system hands you the law, but not the truth? No one answered right away. That was good. The right questions shouldn't be easy. After class, one student waited behind. Young, quiet, sharp. She asked, "Do you regret any of it?" I looked her in the eye, thought about Charlotte, Diana, my kids. Then I said, "Every day, and I'd do it again. But this time, I'd speak sooner." She nodded, wrote something down, and left. And as I stood in that quiet room, empty now except for my own breath, I realized I wasn't just teaching, I was testifying. A week after the lecture, I got an email. No subject line, just one sentence in the body. "Your words kept me from walking away, from law, and maybe more." No name, no signature. I read it 3 times, then closed the laptop and sat there, letting the silence settle, not in grief, but in gratitude. Because that's the part no one tells you. Justice doesn't echo in courtrooms. It lives in whispers, in inboxes at 2 a.m., in the people who heard your story and quietly decided to stay. That night I told Ava about the message. She smiled without looking up from her sketch pad. "Looks like you're still saving people, even without the cape." I wore a tie, not a cape. "Same thing," she said, "but less cool." Liam passed by, earbuds in. "Hey," he said, "that article Diana wrote? They're teaching it at NYU now." I raised an eyebrow. He shrugged. "Just saying, you're in a textbook now, old man." I laughed, the kind of laugh that doesn't chase pain out but makes room around it. Later I stood by the window and looked out at the street. Same brownstone, same sidewalk. But the man standing here? Different. Not because I survived Victor Hale, not because I testified, but because I stayed. I stayed for the ones who couldn't, for the ones who wouldn't, and now for the ones just beginning to believe again. This was no longer a story about what I lost. It was about what I could give, before it was too late for someone else. It was nearly midnight when the phone rang. Unknown number. No voicemail, No caller ID? Just the kind of silence that hums like a warning. I stared at the screen. My instinct, the old version of me, told me to let it go. But instinct had gotten me silence before. So I answered. "Ethan Cole," I said. There was a pause. Then, "You don't know me, but I knew Charlotte." The voice was male, young, nervous, not a reporter, not a threat, something else, the sharpness of guilt wrapped in time. He continued, "I was in her cohort at Stanford. Bioethics. She sent me an email the night before she died. I never answered it." I stood, walked toward the kitchen, away from the sleeping house. "She said she had documents," he added. "Proof of the G0 trials. I thought it was paranoid." He took a breath. "They came for me too, a few weeks later. Not like her. Just enough to shut me up. I left the program, changed my name. And now?" I asked. "I saw the trial. I saw you. I saw her sister." Silence stretched again. "I want to help," he said. "Not because I'm brave, but because I'm done running." I looked at the clock. 12:03 a.m., a new day, a new name. "Where are you?" I asked. "I'm in the city," he said. "Do you think she'd want me to speak?" I didn't answer right away, because it wasn't about what Charlotte would want. It was about what her voice had already done, even in silence. So I said, "She already spoke. You're just the next one who finally heard her." I gave him Diana's number, told him where to start, and hung up. Back upstairs, I passed Ava's room, the light still on, and I realized Charlotte's story wasn't over. It was still echoing forward, one voice at a time. By Friday morning, Diana had already met with him, the man from the call. His real name was Micah Voss. She sent me a photo, a grainy selfie of the two of them in a crowded cafe. Micah looked tired, but alive in a way I recognized, the face of someone who's finally done pretending they weren't part of something that mattered. Diana's message just said, "Another match lit. You started this fire, Ethan." I didn't reply, because she was wrong. Charlotte started this. Diana carried it. And now, people like Micah were finally stepping into the light, not to be heroes, but to be honest. That afternoon, I stopped by her office. She was sitting in front of a whiteboard already covered in timelines and names, not for a story, but for a series. "3 more people have reached out since the sentencing," she said, not looking up. "A lab tech in Zurich, an accountant in Cape Town, a data analyst from Seattle, all ex-Hale." I blinked. "And they're talking?" She looked at me then, tired eyes, sharp smile. "They're done being ghosts." We stood in silence for a moment, letting that sink in. "They're not reaching out because they want justice," she said. "They want to be counted, to know their silence didn't bury someone else." I nodded. That was the truth of survival. You don't always speak to win. Sometimes you speak just to join the chorus. As I turned to leave, I glanced back at the whiteboard. Names, dates, trails, dotted lines. It didn't look like an investigation anymore. It looked like a network of memory, a map of people no longer willing to disappear. And suddenly, I understood. The trial may have ended, but the story was still spreading. And this time, no one would bury it. It started small, a podcast episode, then a clip on late-night TV, then a headline that read, "The Charlotte Hart Effect, when one voice shatters $1 billion silence." They weren't telling my story anymore. They were telling hers. And that was exactly right. Charlotte, who once whispered her fears into private messages and encrypted drives, was now on the cover of national magazines, not as a victim, not even as a whistleblower, but as a warning, a symbol, and somehow, still, a sister. Ava printed out one of the articles, pushed it across the table without saying a word. It was a full-page layout. Charlotte's college photo, faded but strong. At the bottom, the quote, "Even if no one listens, I will have said it." I swallowed hard. "She'd hate the attention," I muttered. Ava smirked. "Yeah, but she'd love that it's finally louder than the lie." Later that night, I got a call from the law school. They wanted to create a scholarship in Charlotte's name, not for top students, not for perfect resumes, for the ones who knew how to ask hard questions and refused to look away. I didn't cry, but I said yes, immediately, without conditions. Because some victories aren't about revenge. They're about making sure the next Charlotte doesn't get buried in a system that pretends not to hear her. And as I hung up, I whispered something into the dark. They hear you now, Char, and they won't stop. The scholarship ceremony was simple. No red carpet, no TV cameras, just a lecture hall, folding chairs, a name on the screen in serif font, the Charlotte Hart Fellowship for Ethical Courage. Diana sat beside me, quiet but steady. Ava was 2 rows back, sketching the podium in her notebook. Liam hadn't said he was coming, but when I scanned the back, I saw him standing, hoodie up, leaning against the wall. The dean spoke, then a professor, then a young woman, the first recipient, a second-year law student from Chicago, voice trembling but clear. I almost dropped out last semester, she said, because I thought the truth didn't matter unless you had power. Then I read Charlotte's story, and I realized truth is power. If you carry it long enough, it becomes unignorable. Silence, then applause. Not loud, not performative, just real. After the ceremony, people filtered out. I stayed behind. I walked up to the podium, not to speak, but to stand where her name had stood. Diana joined me. She would have hated the attention, she whispered. But she would have stayed anyway, I replied. She would have stayed for the ones who came next. We stood there for a moment, just breathing. Then Liam approached, slow. He didn't say anything, just handed me a folded piece of paper. When I opened it, I saw his handwriting. 6 words. This is what winning looks like. I looked up, and for the first time, my son was smiling. Not big, not loud, just there. And in that one moment, more than the trial, the sentence, the headlines, I finally understood. We hadn't just stopped something. We had started something better. That night, the house was quiet. Not the kind of silence that follows conflict. Not that tight, aching stillness that used to settle in after every courtroom battle or news headline. This silence was soft, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. I stood by the kitchen window, mug in hand, watching the glow from the streetlights flicker against the sidewalk. Ava was upstairs. Liam was out with friends, real ones, the kind he hadn't trusted for a long time. And I wasn't waiting for anything. No subpoenas, no phone calls, no headlines. Just the sound of the radiator clicking, and a house learning how to breathe again. I walked into my office. The walls looked different now. Charlotte's framed scholarship photo hung above my desk. Next to it, a printed version of Diana's article, circled, highlighted, annotated by Ava like it was a sacred text. There were no case files anymore, just books, drawings, a calendar with birthdays circled, not deadlines. I sat down and opened my notebook. Page 1. Justice is not the end of the story. Page 2 was still blank, so I started writing. Not a speech, not a deposition, just thoughts. Where we go after survival. What it means to be a father who failed and still showed up. What it means to hold space for grief and gratitude at the same time. After half a page, I stopped, because that was enough for one night. Because sometimes healing isn't about what you write down. It's about knowing you no longer have to write for your life to matter. And for the first time in years, I was okay with the quiet. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. No urgent noise, no headline dread, just light leaking gently through the curtains, and the faint sound of birds on the windowsill. For once, I didn't reach for my phone. I made coffee. Not the old kind, the quick, burnt kind I'd gulp between depositions. The real kind, beans ground slowly, boiled water, a mug that didn't belong in a courtroom. Ava wandered in wearing headphones, mumbling lyrics to something I didn't recognize. She poured her own cup, sipped, made a face. Still too strong. You said that last week. You still haven't listened. We didn't argue. We just let the moment pass. Liam followed 10 minutes later. Backpack half zipped, hoodie half on, hair a mess. You good? I asked. Yeah, he said, grabbing toast. Midterms, then film club. A pause. Then, you gonna write today? I looked at him, surprised. Yeah, I said. I think I am. He gave a half nod, the kind that didn't need explanation, and left with a slam of the front door that didn't sting anymore. I walked back to the office, sat at my desk, opened the notebook again. This time, the words came easier. Day 1, not of the fight, not of survival, but of living without a case number taped to my chest. I kept going. Not about Victor, not about betrayal, about forgiveness, about re-entry, about how to show up for your children after the world stops spinning. I didn't know who the writing was for yet. Maybe a book, maybe a class, maybe just me. But I knew this. When you survive something meant to break you, the hardest part isn't the fight. It's allowing joy again, without guilt. And that's where I was now. Not free of scars, just ready to walk with them in the daylight. That afternoon, I found myself in the attic. I hadn't been up there since before the trial, before Charlotte's file landed on my desk, before I started hiding parts of myself in folders in silence. It smelled like dust and cedar and memory. Boxes stacked against the wall, some labeled in my handwriting, some in Lauren's. I avoided those. Instead, I reached for an unlabeled bin, cracked it open. Inside, Ava's third-grade science trophy, Liam's first glove, a dried rose Charlotte had pressed into a book on my birthday, back when we still argued about art versus law over dinner. At the bottom, an old recorder, still loaded with a tape from years ago. I clicked play. The static hissed, then cleared. "This is Ava Cole, age 9, and this is my dad. He says the law is about truth, but he still can't dance." I laughed out loud. Alone, but not lonely. Then Liam's voice, younger, sharper. "Dad says if we keep asking questions, no one can ever make us small." I let the tape play to the end. Then I sat there, holding it, understanding something I hadn't before. It wasn't the case that defined me. It wasn't the fight. It was the people I'd protected, the questions I taught them to ask, the stories we'd recorded, not for evidence but for memory. I placed the recorder back in the bin gently, then labeled the box with a black marker, what we kept. Because moving forward doesn't mean letting go. It means knowing what to carry, and how to carry it better. A week later, I drove to the edge of the city, to the brownstone Lauren still lived in, the one Victor had once helped her renovate. I hadn't been back since the day I left, not when I dropped off Liam. Not after the trial, not even after sentencing, but something in me said it was time, not to reopen wounds, just to close a door properly. She answered after the second knock. No makeup, no mask, just Lauren. There was a long pause. Then, "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't," I said. "Why now?" "I'm not here to fight," I said. "I'm not even here to forgive." She crossed her arms. "Then what?" I took a breath. I wanted to see the house one more time, not for what it became, but for what it used to be. Her jaw tightened, but she nodded. She stepped aside. I walked through slowly, room by room. The kitchen where Ava learned to bake. The hallway where Liam scraped his knee chasing a remote control car. The bedroom where we once slept in peace, before secrets nested in the walls. None of it felt like home anymore. But strangely, none of it felt like war either. It just was. Before I left, I turned to her. "Liam's doing okay," I said. "He's finding his footing." "I know," she whispered. "He's still my son, too." I nodded. "I hope you find your footing too, Lauren. No rage, no bitterness, just truth, stripped of venom." Then I stepped outside. The door shut behind me, and I didn't look back. Because some houses aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to be remembered, then left, with nothing but gratitude, and a choice never to return. Spring came late that year, or maybe I just noticed it more, the way the trees outside the house began to soften at the edges, pale green pushing through bare limbs, quiet and insistent. Ava came home with paint on her jeans. Liam stayed out late and didn't lie about where he'd been. The air smelled like change, but not the kind that threatened, the kind that asks if you're ready. I cleaned out the backyard one afternoon. Dead leaves, broken fence slats, the kind of chores I used to put off when the world was burning. In the corner, I found a patch of soil Ava once tried to turn into a garden, 3 years ago, back when Charlotte was still alive, back when the world still made a kind of sense. The dirt was hard, cracked from seasons of neglect. Still, I knelt down, started breaking it up with my hands, fingers raw, sweat on my brow, no gloves, no plan, just the decision to start again. Ava came out an hour later. "You're gardening now?" she teased. "Just digging," I said. "Haven't earned the gardening part yet." She knelt beside me, dropped a small paper bag in the dirt. "Marigolds," she said. "Charlotte's favorite." I looked at her. "You remembered?" She shrugged. You think I forgot anything from that year? We planted them in silence. No speeches, no metaphors spoken aloud. But I knew what we were doing. We weren't planting flowers. We were planting proof that even in soil scorched by betrayal, something could still grow. And maybe we didn't need to see it bloom to believe in it. Maybe belief was enough. A few days later, Ava hosted dinner. Her idea, her menu, her rules. Liam helped in the kitchen, grumbling about onions, but not leaving. Diana arrived late, manuscript in hand, eyes tired, smile honest. There was no occasion, no headline, no victory to toast, just a meal. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest in my own story. We sat on the floor because Ava said the dining table had no soul, pillows, candles, a half-burnt playlist echoing from her speaker. Midway through the meal, someone spilled water. Diana cursed. Ava laughed so hard she couldn't breathe. Even Liam cracked a grin. And I sat there watching it all. The mess, the light, the music, the unfiltered joy. It hit me then. This was what Victor tried to steal. Not data, not money, not even my name. He tried to sever the thread that held us together. But we were still here, still laughing. Not because we won, but because we refused to stay broken. Ava reached for her sketchbook, flipped to a blank page, and drew the scene in real time. Wine glass tipped, Diana mid-yell, Liam scowling. She looked at me and said, "Smile, Dad. This one's going on the fridge." I did, and it wasn't forced, because this exact moment wasn't about what we survived. It was about who we became in spite of it. Together, still whole in all the ways that mattered. The next week, I stood in front of another classroom. Not a courtroom, not a spotlight, just a room of students. Pens clicking, screens glowing, eyes watching. Fordham had invited me back, not as a guest this time, but to teach a full seminar. Truth, power, and silence. Ethics in high-stakes law. I walked in with a box of old files, a story that nearly broke me, and no intention of pretending I had all the answers. First day, I didn't hand out a syllabus. I handed out a case, Charlotte's. Redacted, of course, but raw, real. No hero arc, no verdict. Just the beginning of a girl who tried to speak, and the system that tried to silence her. One student raised his hand. "Are we supposed to solve this?" "No," I said. "You're supposed to understand why no one did in time." They went quiet, and I realized this is what legacy feels like. Not applause, not headlines, responsibility. At the end of class, a student lingered. She looked maybe 19, sharp eyes, quiet posture. Said her sister was a chemist, said she'd almost given up on law. "I read your article, the one Diana wrote." "She wrote it," I corrected. "You lived it," she said. Then, "I want to be someone who listens early, not just reacts late." I nodded, throat tight. "Then you're already ahead of where I started." She left. I looked around the empty room. Chalk dust, window light, the echo of chairs scraped back. And I thought, not for the first time, maybe I didn't survive to rebuild my old life. Maybe I survived to build something better, for the ones still coming. That Friday, after my last seminar of the week, I stayed behind in the empty classroom. The chairs were still askew. The board still held half a quote from Ava, one I'd written out earlier for the students to discuss. Telling the truth doesn't make you safe, it makes you seen. No one erased it. I sat at the desk, not as a lawyer, not even as a teacher, just as a man who had once fought the truth like an enemy, and learned to kneel before it instead. Diana called. "I just got off with the publisher," she said. "It's official. The book's moving forward." I exhaled. Not relief, something deeper. "They want to call it the Echo Ledger," she added. "Your name's on the cover, but you can change that." "No," I said quietly. "It's not mine. Not really." She paused. Then, "She'd be proud, Ethan." I didn't answer. I just closed my eyes and let the moment stretch. When we hung up, I looked out the window. Students were walking in clusters, laughing, headphones in, notebooks under their arms like shields and invitations at once. I remembered being that age, wanting to prove something, and not yet understanding that the real power comes from what you protect, not what you conquer. Before I left, I erased the board. Not to forget, but to make room for what comes next. Then I picked up my bag, turned off the lights, and stepped out into the hallway, not as someone fleeing a courtroom, but but as someone quietly choosing to return. That evening, Liam was waiting at the kitchen table. No headphones, no distractions. Just a cup of tea and a look I hadn't seen in a long time. One that wasn't guarded or angry, or measuring how far he could trust me. "Got a minute?" he asked. I nodded and sat. He slid over a sheet of paper, a school form. "College counseling stuff," he said. They want us to write about a moment that changed our view of the world." "And?" "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "There's too many moments now." I looked down at the blank section, then said carefully, "Start with the one where you stopped being afraid to ask questions." He looked at me, not surprised, not defensive, just open. "I used to think asking meant I didn't know enough," he said. "Now I think it means I'm finally ready to hear the answers." I smiled. "That's the most honest sentence in this house in 2 years," I said. He smirked. "I got it from your class notes." We sat there a while, not talking about the form or Charlotte or Victor, just life, what classes he liked, what Ava was drawing lately, whether I was going to keep teaching or write another article. And then, as casually as someone asking to borrow the car keys, he said, "Are we okay now?" The kind of question that would have gutted me a year ago. Now I met it with truth. I met it with, "We're not who we were, but we're here, and we're choosing each other. That's better than okay." He nodded, didn't need more. And as I watched him gather his things and head upstairs, tall, quiet, unafraid, I realized this was what the whole fight had been for. Not justice, not victory, but permission to stay in the room long enough to finally be known. The next morning, no one rushed, no slammed doors, no burnt toast, no panicked calls about forgotten papers or court briefs. Just the quiet rhythm of a family relearning how to coexist without crisis. I stood by the kitchen counter, stirring coffee, listening to the slow shuffle of footsteps above. Ava was humming something, a melody she'd been working on, half sketch, half song. Liam's door opened, closed, then opened again like he'd forgotten something. No tension in any of it, just life, unfolding. Diana texted. "Book layouts finalized. Title, The Ones Who Stayed." "You okay with that?" I stared at the screen. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I looked around the room, the kitchen light flickering slightly, the fridge covered in Ava's magnets and Liam's course reminders. A slow, imperfect hum. And then I typed back, "Yes, that's exactly who we are." That night we didn't eat around a table. We sat in the living room, takeout containers, mismatched forks, Liam on the floor, Ava with a sketchbook in her lap. We didn't talk about the book, or the case, or what we'd lost. We talked about a terrible movie, a teacher Liam hated, a professor Ava secretly respected but would never admit it out loud. At one point I laughed so hard I had to set my drink down, not because the joke was that funny, but because for the first time I laughed without checking who wasn't laughing. And in that moment, with no danger pressing in, no past clawing at the edges, no courtroom or legacy demanding my breath, I felt it. Peace. Not permanent, not perfect, but real. And in the silence that followed, no one rushed to fill it. Because finally, silence didn't mean something was broken. It just meant we didn't need to explain ourselves anymore. Sunday came with rain, not the violent kind. Just a soft, steady drizzle that coated the windows and made the world feel smaller, quieter, contained. I stayed in bed longer than usual, not out of exhaustion, but because there was no reason to move quickly, no emergency, no hidden file waiting on my desk, no enemy behind the curtain. When I finally got up, I found Ava curled on the couch, blanket around her shoulders, sketching with a half-eaten croissant balanced on her knee. Liam was in the kitchen, attempting pancakes. The smell of burning told me he wasn't winning. "You're awake," he said, flipping something that was definitely not round. "I am," I replied. "And you're cooking?" "I'm experimenting," he corrected. "If this goes wrong, we never speak of it again. Deal." We ate in the living room again. No music, just the sound of forks scraping and occasional laughter when someone bit into something half-cooked. I looked at them, Ava, barefoot, focused, the tip of her pencil smudging the corner of her drawing. Liam, eyes brighter lately, leaning into the moment instead of away from it. There was no speech to give, no lesson to teach, just this. The day didn't need saving. The people I loved were here, and I didn't have to earn it through blood or strategy. That was new. I spent years learning how to fight, but now I was learning how to stay, how to let stillness mean something good, how to let a slow, rainy Sunday mean we made it, not through luck, through intention, through not walking away. Because sometimes peace isn't something you win in court, it's something you protect, one quiet day at a time. That evening, the rain kept falling. Ava had gone out. Gallery show, a friend's invite. Liam was at the library, texting memes instead of studying. And for the first time in months, the house was quiet and empty. Just me, the soft rhythm of rain on the windows, and the occasional creak of old floorboards adjusting to time. I thought I'd feel uneasy, that the quiet would pull me backward, into memories I'd fought to survive, into ghosts. But it didn't. I made tea, sat by the window, and opened the file again. Charlotte's letter, the one she wrote to the ethics board, the one they buried, the one we'd resurrected not as a weapon, but as truth that deserved a place to breathe. I read it slowly, out loud this time. Her words weren't new, but tonight they felt different. Not like a plea, not like a warning, but like a voice finally allowed to exist in a space that no longer flinched at its presence. When I finished, I whispered, "I'm still here, Char, and they hear you now. Every word." There was no reply, of course, no sign, no closure wrapped in light. But in the stillness that followed, I didn't feel empty. I felt accompanied by her courage, by our survival, by the life we're building in her name, not to rewrite the past, but to prove it mattered. And in that quiet, I understood something simple and whole. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means making room for what hurt, for what changed us, and for what still remains. The next morning, I walked past the mirror in the hallway. Not quickly, not the way I used to, avoiding my own reflection like it might accuse me. This time, I stopped. I looked. Lines a little deeper, eyes a little softer. The kind of face that had weathered storms and no longer needed to apologize for the wear. I didn't look like the man who walked into Victor Hale's trap, or the man who fought his way out of it. I looked like someone who stayed, even when it got hard, especially when it got hard. I walked into my study. There, on the desk, was something new. A package from Fordham's law department. Inside, a framed quote they had hung in the seminar hall. "Silence protects power. Truth protects people. Choose wisely." Ethan Cole. I stared at it, not because I believed I was wise, but because I finally understood. Legacy isn't what they quote. It's what they remember when you leave the room, and I wasn't leaving the room anymore. Later that night, Ava came home humming again. Liam asked if I'd help with a mock interview for his college applications. No drama, no declarations, just small things that used to slip past me. And somehow now, those were the most sacred, because after survival, after justice, after grief, what really matters isn't how loudly you return, it's how gently you stay. The courthouse hadn't changed. Same limestone steps, same heavy glass doors, same smell, cold paper, coffee, and dust stirred by quiet wars. But this time, I wasn't there to fight. I was invited to speak, to a group of first-year public defenders shadowing real cases. Diana had helped set it up. She called it repairing faith from the inside out. It sounded noble. It felt strange. The courtroom was half full, young eyes, restless knees. Some of them recognized me, maybe from articles, maybe from the book. I stood behind the same podium where I once testified, voice shaking, hands clenched. But now, I opened with calm. I'm not here to tell you how to win. I'm here to ask how you'll live with the cases you lose, or worse, the ones that win for the wrong reasons. Silence. Then, a hand went up. A young woman, maybe 23, asked, "How do you know when the truth is enough?" I paused, then answered, "When you can speak it without needing someone else to believe it, and still sleep at night." Afterwards, a few students stayed behind to thank me. One handed me a folded piece of paper. Inside, a copy of Charlotte's original ethics complaint, printed, highlighted, studied. She said, "This made me want to stay in law school." I held the paper for a moment, not as evidence, as proof of continuation. Outside, the clouds had cleared. A thin strip of light crossed the courthouse steps like a line freshly drawn, not between good and evil, but between who I was and who I've become. And for once I crossed it with no weight on my shoulders. Just the truth. Still mine, still whole, still enough. As I stepped away from the courthouse, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel broken either. I just felt clear. It wasn't the place that had changed. It was me. Years ago, I left this building hollowed out, bleeding trust and purpose. Now I walk down those same steps holding something I hadn't had back then. Direction. Not revenge. Not redemption. Just a compass quietly pointing toward what matters next. Halfway to the subway, I passed a bookstore window. There it was. The spine of Diana's book, The Ones Who Stayed. Between two political memoirs and a biography of a war hero. It didn't shout. It just existed. Steady, unflinching, real. I stepped inside, bought a copy. Not because I hadn't read it, but because I wanted a version that wasn't marked with my edits or grief. I wanted to hold it like a reader. When I got home, Ava was painting on the kitchen floor. Liam was asleep on the couch, textbook on his chest. I stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching, breathing, the book in my hands, the story behind me, the life still unfolding. I thought of Charlotte, of the people who never made it through their own fire. And I whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the quiet between what was and what is. I brought it all back, and I'm still here. And I know now, surviving was never the end. It was the beginning of carrying it right. Then I placed the book on the shelf, between two others that had nothing to do with trials, and everything to do with living. Because some stories don't ask for a headline, they just ask to stay. Saturday morning came slow. No alarms, no agenda. The kind of day that used to feel like a waste, back when I believed rest had to be earned and silence had to be justified. Now, it felt like a quiet kind of wealth. Ava was still asleep, her sketchbook cracked open on the table like a diary. Liam had gone out for a run, a habit he'd picked up not for fitness, but for thinking. I sat by the window with coffee, nothing in my hands but warmth. No trial prep, no news feed, no strategy, just light crawling across the hardwood, and the faint hum of the neighborhood waking up. At some point I must have drifted, not asleep, just somewhere soft between memory and breath. And when I opened my eyes again, the world hadn't ended. No one needed saving. There was just the sound of a key in the door. Liam walked in, flushed from the cold. "You okay?" he asked, dropping his shoes by the mat. "Yeah," I said. "Just sitting." He grinned. "Weird." "I know," I said, "but good weird." He nodded, then added, almost too casually, "It's nice, seeing you not fix anything." I smiled, because he was right. I had spent years treating stillness like weakness, a pause between blows, an opening for guilt to creep in. But today, stillness was enough. It didn't mean I'd forgotten what we lost. It just meant I'd finally accepted what we still had. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't the aftermath. This was the life after the fire, quiet, unfinished, and entirely mine to live. That evening I cooked dinner, not out of obligation, not to distract myself, just because I wanted to. Ava wandered into the kitchen halfway through, eyebrows raised. "You okay?" she asked, eyeing the cutting board. "Surprisingly," I said. "Why?" "You're humming." I hadn't realized. Something soft, aimless, a tune from nowhere, or maybe from before. She leaned on the counter, stealing a piece of roasted carrot. "Smells good. Weirdly domestic of you." "I'm testing out this thing called stability," I said. "Don't tell anyone." She smiled, then grabbed plates without being asked. No tension, no test, just movement. Liam joined us a few minutes later, dropping his bag by the door like he'd done it 1,000 times. Like leaving and returning was normal now, not a risk. We ate with the windows open. The city moved in the background. Cars, laughter, distant horns, but none of it pressed in. Halfway through the meal, Ava said, "You know, I don't miss the old house." Liam nodded. "Me either." I didn't say anything, but they didn't need me to. Because this, mismatched plates, uneven chairs, no centerpieces, this was home. Not because it was perfect, but because we stayed. We stayed through the wreckage. We stayed through the silence. And now, we were staying through peace. After dinner, we sat on the floor, passing a cheap deck of cards between us. No one won. No one cared. And as the night settled in, no threat, no plan, no headline, I looked at them both, laughing over nothing, and thought, this is what survival bought us. Not power, not revenge, just the right to stay in the room and belong. Later that night, after Ava and Liam had gone upstairs, I found myself back in the study. The deck of cards still sat on the coffee table, a glass of water untouched, the kind of silence that didn't demand attention, but invited it. I opened the drawer. Inside, beneath a folder of clipped articles and court summaries, was an old USB drive, labeled in Charlotte's handwriting, "Not for trial, just for you." I had never opened it. Not during discovery, not after sentencing, not even after the scholarship ceremony. But now, with no more enemies left to confront, no defense to build, no outcome to fear, I plugged it in. The screen flickered. One file, an audio recording, dated 2 weeks before she died. I hit play. Her voice came through, quiet, unsure, but hers. "Ethan, if you're hearing this, something probably went wrong, or maybe it didn't. Maybe I'm just tired of waiting for the right moment." I leaned back. Let it play. "I don't want this to be another piece of evidence. I want it to be something you can carry when it gets quiet, because I know you. You don't stop fighting. But sometimes you forget how to rest." A pause. A shaky laugh. "You were the first person who ever told me I mattered more than the system. I didn't believe you then. I believe you now." Another pause. "If you're still standing, that means you kept going. And I just want you to know, I'm glad it was you. Not because you were perfect, but because you stayed." The file ended. No music, no sign-off, just silence again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. I didn't cry. I just sat there, letting the sound of her voice live in the room a little longer. Because grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just sits with you, quietly, and lets you feel grateful for what never got erased. And tonight, I didn't feel haunted. I felt held by her voice, by the past, by the fact that even in leaving, she stayed. I left the study door open that night. Charlotte's voice still hung in the air, not loud, not haunting, just present, like a memory that had finally stopped asking to be heard, because it already had been. I didn't sleep right away. I sat by the window, lights dimmed, watching the soft flicker of city windows across the street. Strangers living their own small lives, windows lit for no reason at all, and I thought about what she said. "You forget how to rest." She was right. I had spent years carrying weight that didn't belong to me. Guilt for not saving her in time, shame for letting my family fracture, rage that had nowhere left to burn. But tonight, I saw it differently. Some weight we carry because we must, but some we choose to carry because it reminds us who we've been, who we still are. Charlotte's voice wasn't a wound anymore. It was proof that she lived, that she trusted me, that she believed in the version of me that still shows up, even when it's quiet. I stood, walked to the shelf, picked up the ones who stayed, not to reread, not to analyze, just to hold. Legacy isn't in the lines. It's in the hands that keep reaching for it. And I knew then, with absolute clarity, I would carry her voice, not as burden, but as compass, not to relive the pain, but to remind myself that we do not survive just to feel safe again. We survive to keep others from disappearing. And tomorrow, I'd wake up, pour coffee, open the door, and do that in every small way I could. The next morning I woke before the sun, not from anxiety, not from fear, just ready. There was something different in the air, not urgent, not heavy, just still. I moved through the house like a man who no longer needed armor. No need to rehearse my defenses, no headlines waiting to reshape me. I brewed coffee, fed the cat. Ava had adopted it quietly and unilaterally last month. The quiet didn't press, it welcomed. At 7 a.m., I sat at my desk, the same one where I once built walls from paperwork and anger. Now the surface was clean, just a notepad, a pen, a bookmarked copy of The Ones Who Stayed. I opened a fresh page, wrote one line. I no longer write to survive. I write to remember that I did. It wasn't meant to be profound. It was just the truth. Later, I'd walk to campus, meet my students, not as the man who burned down a system, but as the man who lived after, who kept showing up, kept listening, kept answering the quiet with presence, not panic. Liam would text me later asking for help with an essay. Ava would send a voice note with a sketch idea and a joke only she found funny. Diana would email about the next panel discussion. I'd say yes, even before knowing the topic, because now I didn't need the armor, just the story, and the willingness to step into tomorrow unarmed, but whole. That afternoon, the rain came again. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just a soft, even rhythm against the window, steady enough to fill the house without needing to be explained. I had just finished reviewing notes for next week's seminar when Ava knocked lightly on the study door. She didn't say anything at first, just leaned in, looked around like she was checking something invisible. Then, "You seem different." I smiled. "Tired?" She shook her head. "No, lighter." I didn't respond right away because she wasn't wrong, and for once I didn't feel the need to fill silence with defense. "I think I'm starting to look forward to things again," I said. She raised an eyebrow, teasing. "Like what? Tax season?" I chuckled. "Like dinner, the next story, watching you finish something instead of chasing everything." That softened her. Then she walked in, sat across from me, and slid over a folded sheet of paper. "I want to submit this," she said. It was a sketch, one of her best. A scene from our living room, mismatched chairs, a cracked window, Liam mid-laugh, me blurry in the background. But at the bottom, in her handwriting, she'd titled it, "The Year Nothing Broke Us." I swallowed. "You sure you're ready to show that?" I asked. She nodded. "It's not about being ready. It's about letting it exist." We didn't speak for a while after that. The rain filled the gaps. But I realized something as I sat there, staring at her drawing, at the courage it took to name something so fragile. Maybe peace isn't loud. Maybe it's just the moment when anticipation no longer hurts. And I was there now, not afraid of what came next, but curious, present, open, and finally, willing to feel it all. That night, after Ava went to bed and the house settled into its usual hush, I stayed up just a little longer, not to work, not to untangle anything, but simply to sit. A single lamp lit the room, the kind of soft, amber light that made everything look warmer than it was, a safe kind of falsehood. I picked up her sketch again. "The year nothing broke us." She didn't mean it literally. We were still flawed, still scarred, but she was right. Nothing had broken us. Not Victor, not betrayal, not the system, not even the silence we carried like a second skin. I looked around at the room. The walls hadn't changed, but we had. And suddenly, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in years. Hope. Not the cautious kind, not the whispering kind, the kind that sits down beside you, fully visible, and says, "You're allowed to want more now. More than healing. More than survival. More time. More mornings like this one. More dinners with mismatched plates. More chances to speak truth, not because you have to, but because you finally can." I opened my notebook, not for notes, not for testimony, just a line. Today I didn't brace for anything. I just lived. Then I closed it, turned off the light, and walked upstairs. No fear in my step, no weight in my chest. Because when hope stops whispering, you don't just hear it, you believe it. Sunday morning came with sun, not loud or showy, just enough light pushing through the curtains to remind me the world was still here. And so was I. There was no plan for the day, no meetings, no courtrooms, no damage to contain. Just a house where silence no longer felt like a trap. I made breakfast without checking my phone, let the eggs overcook, didn't care. Ava wandered in with sleep still on her face, hair tied up, hoodie 3 sizes too big. "Morning," she mumbled. "Barely," I said, glancing at the clock. She smirked, stole a piece of toast, and disappeared again without explanation. A few minutes later, Liam came down the stairs, earbuds in, hoodie zipped, nodding to a beat only he could hear. He didn't speak, just fist-bumped me on the way to the fridge. And I stood there for a moment, watching both of them move through the house like they belonged, not performing, not protecting, just existing. And that's when it hit me. This, right here, was who I had fought to become. Not a hero, not a survivor, not a symbol of resilience. Just a man who could stand in his own kitchen, barefoot and unguarded, while his children lived freely around him, without fear, without questions, without tiptoeing around the wreckage of his past. Not long ago, I was a man people watched because of how spectacularly things had fallen apart. Now, I was a man becoming invisible again, because nothing needed fixing. And that, I realized, was the highest peace I could have hoped for. To be unremarkable, because everything was finally okay. That afternoon, Ava dragged me to a local art fair. No agenda, no pitch, just a text. "You're coming. Wear shoes that don't scream lawyer." I almost said no. The instinct was still there, that reflex to stay behind, to stay useful. But I didn't. I put on a worn denim jacket, the one Charlotte once teased me for never washing, and met Ava at the train. The fare wasn't much. Local vendors, sidewalk chalk, acoustic music from a too small speaker. But there was something honest about it. No pretense, no performance. We wandered between booths. She paused too long at a collection of hand-stitched journals. I bought one when she wasn't looking. She caught me, of course, rolled her eyes, but she didn't give it back. At one booth, a woman was selling block prints, cityscapes, childhood bedrooms, broken swings, rain-soaked sidewalks, memory, carved in ink. One print caught my eye. It was just a simple kitchen scene. 2 chairs, a window, a single coffee mug. I bought it without thinking. Ava raised an eyebrow. "No quotes? No dramatic imagery? Just breakfast?" "Yeah," I said. "That's kind of the point." We sat on the curb later, paper cups of lemonade in hand, letting the noise of the fair roll around us. Ava looked over, almost cautious. "You're different." "How so?" "You're not carrying the room anymore." I nodded. "That's because I finally believe the room can hold itself." She smiled. Quiet. Proud. Then leaned her head on my shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was 12. And in that moment I felt it. Not triumph, not closure, not even healing, just joy. Uncomplicated. Unapologetic. Mine. And I didn't flinch, didn't second guess, didn't brace for the moment to vanish. Because for once, I wasn't just surviving the good days. I was letting them stay. We got back just after dark. The hallway smelled like old wood and something vaguely sweet. Liam must have baked again and forgotten to clean up. Typical. I set the print down on the console table near the door. 2 chairs, a window, a coffee mug. Ava glanced at it one more time as she kicked off her shoes. "It really is just a kitchen," she said. "Exactly," I replied. She gave me a look, half teasing, half knowing, and headed upstairs. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Not in that old, hollow way. Just resting. I stood in the center of the living room for a long minute, taking in the soft clutter. Notebooks left open, a jacket tossed over the back of a chair, Ava's sketchbook on the windowsill, and Liam's sneakers half-kicked under the couch. There was no order to it. And yet, it felt perfectly held together. Years ago, I would have tidied it up, straightened the mess, fixed what looked imperfect. Control was how I coped. But now I saw something else in the chaos. Evidence that we live here, not just survive here. I picked up the framed print and carried it into the kitchen, hung it right above the coffee maker. No ceremony, no tools, just a nail already in the wall. It fit perfectly. Not because the wall was made for it, but because we were. This home didn't need to be impressive. It just needed to be ours. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I didn't wonder how long it would last. I didn't brace for what might break. I simply stood there in the soft hum of a room that no longer asked for explanation. And I thought, maybe peace isn't the end of the story. Maybe it's just the place where you finally put down the pen and decide to stay. That night, I dreamt for the first time in months. Not a nightmare, not a courtroom, not Charlotte's voice vanishing mid-sentence, just a dream. I was standing in our kitchen, not the real one, but some softer version of it, flooded with morning light that didn't come from any real window. Ava was humming. Liam was arguing with a toaster. Charlotte wasn't there, but her laugh was. Somewhere off-screen, like a memory that didn't need to be visible to be felt. And for once, I didn't wake up gasping, didn't bolt upright, sweating and bracing for something gone wrong. I just blinked into the morning and breathed. Outside, the light looked almost exactly like it had in the dream, that strange golden hour glow that made everything, even the most ordinary things, feel sacred. I sat up slowly, no urgency, no plan, just the quiet realization that I had slept deeply, that my body, for the first time in years, had believed it was safe. There's a kind of healing you don't notice in the mirror. You only feel it in moments like that, when your mind stops rehearsing disaster. when your heart finally trusts that the silence isn't a warning, when even your subconscious starts to build something new, something gentler, something earned. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window, and I whispered, to no one, and to everything, let it stay, I'm ready now. And for once, the world didn't answer with chaos. It answered with light. The smell of coffee reached me before I even made it down the stairs. Someone had already brewed it, not for show, not out of habit, but because someone else existed in this house and thought, he'll want this. I found Liam in the kitchen, barefoot, scrolling on his phone, mug in hand. He glanced up. You're late. I looked at the clock. It's Sunday. That's what I said. I poured a cup, took a seat. No rush, no looming calendar, no inbox screaming my name. Ava wandered in moments later, wearing a hoodie that used to be mine. She grabbed a banana, then paused. You okay? The question wasn't loaded. It wasn't asking for layers, just a check-in, just care. Yeah, I said, taking a sip. I slept. She looked at me for a moment, really looked, then just nodded like that was enough. Because now, in this version of our life, it was. The three of us sat in silence, not tense, not broken, just there. And I realized how rare that had been for us once, how mornings used to mean dodging mood swings, unfinished arguments, unanswered texts, grief that clung to the corners of the room like fog. Now, they meant toast, and shared space, and a kind of quiet that didn't ask for forgiveness. There was no big speech, no dramatic turn, just a kitchen filled with people who had once braced against each other, and now leaned in. And I thought, maybe healing doesn't show up all at once. Maybe it walks in slowly through a door that's finally left unlocked, and just stays, like sunlight, like laughter, like family, returned, redefined, and still whole. Later that afternoon, I found myself walking, no destination, just the kind of walk you take when your body wants movement, but your mind wants stillness. The neighborhood was alive in the ordinary way. Kids on bikes, someone mowing a lawn too early in the season, a dog barking at nothing in particular. No one looked at me twice, no whispers, no sideways glances, no one tying my name to a case, a scandal, a tragedy. Just another man in a jacket, hands in his pockets, head slightly tilted toward the sun. And for the first time in a long time, I let that be enough. I stopped by the bookstore without meaning to. Same one from months ago. The copy of The Ones Who Stayed was still in the front window, slightly faded now, pages curled from sun and time. I didn't go in. I just stood there watching people pass, watching them not know anything about me. And I thought, there's freedom in being unknown again, not invisible, just free. Free to exist without narrative, free to love what's quiet, free to wake up and not explain yourself to the past. On the way home, I passed a mural on the side of a brick building. I'd never noticed it before. It was simple. 2 open hands painted in soft gray tones. No text, no artist's signature, just hands, holding nothing. But not empty. I stood there longer than I meant to, not searching for meaning, just receiving it. And as the wind picked up, leaves swirling around my feet, I realized something I hadn't put into words until now. Healing isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose, over and over, especially when you no longer have to. And today, like every day now, I chose it. Not for anyone else. Not because I needed to prove I was okay, but because peace is worth choosing, even when no one's watching. That evening I cooked again. No occasion, no guests. Just a recipe Ava had bookmarked and stuck to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a broken heart. She said it was ironic. I think it was honest. Liam joined me halfway through, not to help, not really, just to talk. Or maybe to be near someone while saying nothing. That used to scare me. The quiet, the open air between sentences. Now I understood it. It wasn't distance. It was trust, a kind of presence that didn't need to be filled. Smells decent, he said, peering into the pot. High praise from the guy who burns toast, I replied. He smirked, didn't argue. Ava came in late, hair damp, headphones still around her neck. She peeked into the kitchen, took in the scene and said, "We're a little boring these days." And for the first time in years, I smiled at a sentence like that. "Good," I said. "Boring's underrated." She looked at me, curious, measuring. And then she nodded. That was the moment I realized. We weren't rebuilding anymore. We weren't recovering, or repairing, or surviving. We were living, unremarkably, deliberately, together. And I thought, this is what no one tells you about peace. It doesn't roar. It rests. It sits at your kitchen table in socks. It laughs at old jokes with new weight. It tastes like too much salt and not enough timing, but everyone eats it anyway. It is made, not found. Chosen, not fallen into. Held, not hunted. And I was holding it now, not tightly, not desperately, just with care. Later that night, after dinner, the house felt full in that unspoken way. Not loud, not crowded, just alive. Dishes clinked in the sink. Ava was curled on the couch, sketchbook in hand, pencil dancing like it had a secret. Liam sat across from her, reading something with a highlighter, the kind of studying that was more color than comprehension. I stood in the hallway, watching them, not intruding, just witnessing. And for a split second, I saw it all the way it was, not the life I fought to restore, but the life that chose to return when I stopped forcing it. Not perfect, but present. Not loud, but whole. Ava looked up and caught me watching. What? Nothing, I said. She raised an eyebrow. You get sentimental when the dishwasher's running. I chuckled. Guilty. She didn't press. Just smiled, then went back to shading the corner of a face she hadn't quite finished. I turned off the hallway light, stepped back into the room, took a seat, and for a moment I let my mind wander, not to the past, not to the things we lost, but to this exact second, the warmth, the comfort, the absence of fear. And I thought, this is the proof I never had in court. This is the exhibit they never let me show. This is what survival built. Not the verdict, not the headline, but the hum of a life no longer waiting to break. And for the first time, I didn't need to write it down, because I wasn't afraid of forgetting anymore. I was living it, right here, right now, and fully awake to it all. The next morning, the light in the kitchen was softer than usual, muted, like it had passed through a filter of calm before landing here. Liam was already gone, his empty mug in the sink. Ava was asleep upstairs. The cat stretched across the windowsill, owning the sun. I sat at the table with my coffee and thought about the last few weeks. The walks, the dinners, the rain that no longer felt like a warning, the way the house had learned to exhale. It struck me that none of this had happened by accident. Not the peace, not the stillness, not the way our days now folded into each other without the sharp edges they used to have. Somewhere between the trials and the aftermath, between surviving and learning how to stay, I had been building this. Not like a fortress, more like a garden, small choices repeated, letting things grow without constant pruning, letting people be without constant guarding. And now, here it was, the quiet I had once mistaken for emptiness, turning out to be life at its fullest. The thing about peace is, you can't force it. You can't demand it, but you can make space for it. And one day you wake up and realize, it moved in. I finished my coffee. Didn't rush. Didn't plan the day. Just sat there in the light I'd once thought was too soft to trust. And I thought, I didn't just survive my life. I designed the one I wanted to come home to. By late morning, Ava wandered into the kitchen, still wrapped in a blanket, hair messy in a way she clearly didn't care about. She poured coffee, sat across from me, and for a while we didn't say a word. The kind of silence that would have once made me restless, like I should be filling it with updates, plans, or reassurances. But now, it felt like the room was breathing for us. Eventually, she said, "What's on your agenda today?" "Nothing," I said, and meant it. She smirked. "Dangerous." "No," I replied. "Necessary." She nodded, as if she understood more than she was letting on, then reached over, slid my mug toward herself, and took a sip like she'd been doing it her whole life. We ended up sitting there for an hour, talking about nothing big, a song she'd found, a weird dream she had, the cat's obsession with the radiator. It wasn't productive, it wasn't urgent, and that was the point. For years, my days had been carved into battles. Every hour weighed against what I could win, fix, or prove. Now, there was space. Space to linger. Space to waste time without calling it wasted. When she finally got up to head out, she paused at the door. "Hey," she said. "You're different lately." "How so?" "You're here." The words landed without fanfare. But they stayed. Because she wasn't talking about the room. She was talking about me. And for the first time in a long time, I could say it was true. I was here, not bracing, not hiding, just here. By afternoon, the sky shifted. That pale gray that means rain might come, but doesn't promise it. I decided to walk anyway. No route, no phone in my hand. Just the city breathing around me. I passed the park where, years ago, I used to pace phone calls, building cases in my head like fortresses. Back then, I never noticed the trees. Today, I saw one with leaves just starting to turn, edges lit gold in a way that felt deliberate. Half a block later, a street musician was playing something slow, a song I couldn't name but somehow recognized. I stopped to listen, not out of politeness, but because it felt like the only right thing to do in that moment. When he finished, I dropped a bill into his case. He nodded once. No small talk, no transaction beyond that. Just a moment exchanged and kept. As I walked away, I thought about how rare it used to be for me to give my time to something that didn't lead anywhere. No angle, no payoff, no strategy. But lately, these unscripted hours, they'd been building something I couldn't measure. Not progress, not recovery, roots. And maybe that's the thing no one tells you. Peace doesn't just live in the quiet. It grows in the choices you make when no one's asking you to make them. By the time I got home, the rain had started. Light, steady, almost polite. I stepped inside, shook off my jacket, and felt it again. Not the rush of survival, not the relief of safety, just the simple, solid truth of belonging to my own life. The rain was still falling when Ava got home. Her hoodie was soaked through, hair clinging to her face. She kicked off her shoes at the door and didn't bother with small talk. "You're cooking?" she asked, eyeing the cutting board. "Thinking about it," I said. "Why?" She shrugged. "Just wondering if I should eat first or take my chances." I laughed, and it wasn't the guarded kind I used to give. It was the laugh of someone who didn't need to calculate the room before joining it. She disappeared upstairs, music trailing faintly behind her. Liam came in 20 minutes later, dripping from the same rain, dropping his backpack by the couch. "Smells good," he said. "Don't lie," I replied. "I'm not," he shot back. "Yet." We ended up eating together. Not because we'd planned it, but because we'd all drifted toward the same room without thinking. No one said it out loud, but I knew. This was what had been missing for years. Not just safety, not just peace. The unspoken ease of walking into a room and knowing you don't have to earn your place in it. We stayed at the table long after the plates were empty. The rain kept time against the windows. And for a moment, I thought about every version of me who had fought to get here. The one in the courthouse hallway, the one in the empty apartment, the one who thought peace was a prize handed out after the battle. But sitting here now, with two people I loved more than my own name, I understood. Peace isn't given, it's made, by showing up over and over until the room knows you, and you know it back. The rain finally let up overnight. By morning, the streets outside glistened, puddles catching the light like small, deliberate mirrors. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching people pass with their collars up, the city quietly returning to its rhythm. Ava came down first, holding her new journal, the one I'd bought at the fair. She didn't say anything, just sat at the table and started sketching. Liam followed with his headphones around his neck, scrolling through something on his phone. No rush, no tension. Just two people starting their day the way they wanted. I realized, standing there, that I wasn't bracing anymore. Not for the fight. Not for the next loss. Not even for the possibility that this calm might end. There was a time when every good moment felt like bait, like the universe dangling something soft before the drop. But now, tomorrow didn't feel like a threat. It felt like an open door. Not because I knew what was on the other side, but because I'd learned I could walk through it without losing myself. I joined them at the table. No conversation at first. Just the sound of pencils on paper, the faint hum of music from Liam's phone. It struck me then. The world outside could change again. It probably would. But here, in this small kitchen, we'd built something steady enough to hold us through it. And that might be the only kind of victory that matters. Not avoiding storms, but knowing you'll still be you when they pass. Later that day, I found myself in the attic. Not for cleaning. Not to dig up evidence or old files. Just curiosity. Boxes I hadn't opened in years sat stacked like a timeline I'd never walked through. Some were labeled, some weren't. I started with the ones I didn't recognize. Inside the third box, I found an old leather bag, scuffed, worn, the one I used to carry back when I thought my life was only about winning cases. Tucked in the side pocket was a folded sheet of paper. It was a list, not of clients or deadlines, but of places I'd once wanted to see. Half of them I didn't even remember writing down. A lighthouse in Maine, a bookstore in Portland, a small cabin in Vermont someone had once told me felt like the end of the world in the best way. I sat there, paper in hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Permission. Not the kind granted by a verdict, not the kind earned by surviving, the kind you give yourself, to want something that exists entirely outside of necessity. I didn't rush to check anything off, didn't plan the trip or book the cabin. I just refolded the list, slid it into my pocket, and thought, maybe the future doesn't need to be a shield or a weapon. Maybe it can just be a direction you're willing to walk toward. When I came back downstairs, Ava asked what I'd been doing. Looking through old things, I said. Find anything good? I tapped my pocket. Maybe. And for the first time in a long time, maybe felt like enough. That evening, I sat at my desk with the folded list beside me, not to rewrite it, not to trim it down into something realistic, just to look at it. Each line felt like a fragment of a man I used to be, before the trials, before the betrayals, before survival became my full-time occupation. Some entries were vague. Drive without destination. Some were oddly specific. Try the blueberry pie at Ellis's Diner, Route 7. All of them carried the same quiet message. I wanted to be alive for more than the fight. Ava walked by, noticed the paper. What's that? A map, I said. To where? I thought for a moment. To parts of myself I haven't met yet. She grinned. That's weird. Maybe, but it's true. I didn't tell her I had no timeline, no plan. That was the point. The list wasn't a to-do list. It was an open door, one I could walk through any time I chose. Later, I tucked it into the small drawer where I keep the things I'm not ready to lose. Charlotte's pen, Liam's first baseball glove, Ava's earliest sketch on a napkin. Objects that don't demand attention, but stay close enough to remind you what matters. And as I closed the drawer, I realized some things aren't waiting to be finished. They're waiting for you to be ready. And maybe, just maybe, I was getting there. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. No alarm, no reason. Just the soft pull of daylight on the edges of my room. The house was still asleep. Even the cat stayed curled in its spot on the windowsill. I made coffee, but instead of sitting at the kitchen table, I put on a jacket and stepped outside. The street was quiet, just the distant sound of a bus a few blocks away, and the smell of rain still lingering from the night before. I walked without thinking, past the corner store, past the park, past the street where I used to avoid eye contact because I was afraid of what people thought they knew about me. Today, no one looked twice, and I didn't feel the need to look away. Halfway down the block, I stopped at a small cafe I'd never been to. Inside, the light was warm, and the air smelled like cinnamon and something baking. The barista smiled. First time here? I nodded. Then the first one's on us, she said, sliding a steaming mug across the counter. It wasn't a big thing. It wasn't life-changing. But as I sat there, hands wrapped around the cup, I felt something I hadn't in years. I wasn't passing through this life anymore. I was in it. Not as a man recovering from something. Not as someone waiting for permission. Just a man with coffee in his hands, a day ahead of him, and no need to explain why he was here. And I thought, maybe being ready doesn't come with a speech. Maybe it's just the moment you stop checking if you are, and start walking anyway. When I got back from the cafe, the house was awake. Liam was in the living room, stretching before a run. Ava was at the kitchen counter, eating cereal straight from the box. "Where'd you go?" she asked. "Out," I said. She gave me a mock suspicious look. "For what?" "For coffee." "You made coffee here." I wanted a different view. She shrugged, satisfied enough with that answer, and went back to crunching. I went upstairs, but instead of sitting at my desk, I pulled open the drawer where the list waited. I unfolded it, scanning the lines. The lighthouse, the diner, the cabin, and a few things so small they almost felt silly to write down, like watch the sun rise without checking the time. I picked up a pen and added something new. Go somewhere without telling anyone first. Not to vanish, not to hide. Just to prove to myself I could move freely again, without fear, without strategy. I folded the paper back, but this time I didn't put it away. I slipped it into my jacket pocket. Liam passed me on his way out the door. You going somewhere? Eventually, I said. He didn't press. He just nodded, like it made perfect sense. And maybe it did. Because I wasn't planning an escape, I wasn't chasing anything, I was just letting my life turn in small degrees toward things that made me feel alive. Not leaps, not declarations, just quiet turns, until one day you look up and realize you're facing somewhere new. That afternoon, I walked farther than I usually do. No phone in my hand, no map in my head, just a slow rhythm of steps carrying me past streets I'd never bothered to see. I found myself in a part of town I used to avoid. Not because it was dangerous, but because it held too many memories of the years when I was always rushing, always half present. The courthouse wasn't far from here, neither was the apartment I'd stayed in when everything was collapsing. I stood at the corner for a long moment, watching the traffic lights cycle. The old reflex to turn back was still there, faint but familiar. This time, I didn't follow it. Instead, I crossed. There was a bakery on the other side, small, brick-fronted, with a sign so faded you could barely make out the name. Inside, it smelled like sugar and cardamom. A woman behind the counter smiled without recognition. "What can I get you?" I scanned the case, then pointed to something I couldn't name, a pastry folded into itself like a secret. When I took the first bite, it was warm, rich, unexpected. I closed my eyes for a second, letting it be exactly what it was. A taste I'd never had before, in a place I'd never stopped, on a day that hadn't asked for anything from me. And it struck me. Maybe this is how you reclaim a life, not by erasing the places that hurt you, but by walking back into them until they give you something new. I finished the pastry, thanked the woman, and stepped outside. The air felt lighter, not because the street had changed, but because I had. I kept walking, past the bakery, past the courthouse looming at the end of the street. Its steps looked exactly the same, the stone worn down by years of people pacing, waiting, dreading. I remembered standing there once, feeling like the whole city was watching, like every breath I took had to be measured. Back then, even the air felt like judgment. Today, the building was just a building, a backdrop, its weight no longer pressing on my chest. I didn't go inside, didn't need to. Instead, I cut down a side street, one that led to the narrow alley where I used to smoke in the rain, trying to make sense of what was happening to my life. It was quieter now. A stray cat darted past. The brick walls were tagged with new graffiti, bright colors over old scars. I stood there a moment, letting the memory play without pulling me under. This place hadn't forgotten me, but it also wasn't holding me hostage anymore. On the walk home, I passed a mirror in a shop window and almost didn't recognize the man reflected there. Not because he looked different, but because he wasn't carrying the ghosts on his shoulders. They were still with me. They always would be. But now they walked behind, not in front. Maybe the point isn't to leave the ghosts behind. Maybe it's to walk far enough ahead that they can't choose the direction anymore. By the time I reached my street, the sun was sliding low, spilling a warm light across the front steps of my house. The kind of light that makes you slow down without meaning to. I paused at the gate, taking in the quiet hum from inside, a muffled laugh, a chair scraping, music just loud enough to reach the porch. Once, coming home had been another battlefield, a place where the air was thick with unspoken things, where every door I opened carried a risk. Now, it felt like stepping into the safest part of the map. I walked inside to find Ava on the couch, sketchbook open, Liam in the kitchen, making something that smelled vaguely edible. They both glanced up when I came in, not out of suspicion, but in that easy way people notice when someone they care about is back in the room. "Hey," Liam said. "Hey," I answered, hanging my jacket. Ava tilted her head. "You went far." "Yeah," I said. "I needed to." No one asked for details. No one needed the story. They just let me return, exactly as I was, without filling the air with questions. I sat down, stretching my legs, and felt the truth settle in. Healing isn't just facing what hurt you. It's coming back from it without carrying the weight into every room. And tonight, the only thing I carried through the door was the smell of cardamom from that little bakery. After dinner, the three of us stayed in the living room. No TV, no phones in hand. Just the kind of aimless evening that used to feel like wasted time. Ava sprawled across the couch, sketching with one leg hanging off the edge. Liam sat on the floor, leaning against the armrest, eyes half closed as he listened to whatever was playing softly from the speaker. I sat in my chair, coffee cooling on the table beside me, and realized I hadn't thought about work or courtrooms or the past in hours. The quiet wasn't fragile anymore. It didn't feel like a bubble waiting to pop. It felt like it belonged here, woven into the walls, into the rhythm of our days. There was a time I believed stillness meant nothing was happening, that it was a gap between events, a lull before the next impact. Now I knew better. Stillness was where the real things grew: trust, ease, a life you didn't have to keep fixing. Ava looked up from her sketchbook. "What?" "Nothing," I said. She studied me for a moment. "Feels like you're watching for something." "Not watching," I said. "Just noticing." She smiled, then went back to her drawing. And I thought, when the quiet stays, you stop bracing for it to end and start living inside it. Later that night, after Ava went upstairs and Liam disappeared into his room, I stayed in the living room with the lights low. The house was quiet but not empty. It had a kind of hum, the sound of a place that's lived in, not just occupied. I noticed the small things first. The way Ava's sketchbook was still open on the couch, the faint scent of whatever Liam had cooked clinging to the air, the mug I'd left on the table, leaving a perfect ring of coffee on the wood. None of it was remarkable. None of it would make a story. And maybe that was the point. For so long, my eyes had been trained to scan for risk, to catch what was out of place, what could turn dangerous. That was how I'd survived. Now, my gaze lingered on what was steady, what was soft, what had stayed. I leaned back in my chair, letting my body feel the difference. Not tension, not alertness, just here. There's a strange kind of power in choosing what you notice. It shapes the life you believe you're living. If all you see is threat, you live in defense. If you teach yourself to see what's whole, you live in it. Tonight, I noticed the warmth in the room, the weight of my own breathing, the fact that I was here by choice, not because I had nowhere else to go. And I thought, this is what staying feels like. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, not from restlessness, just naturally, like my body trusted the day waiting for me. I went downstairs and made coffee. The floorboards creaked in the same spots they always had, but now the sound felt familiar instead of fragile. Outside, the street was still damp from last night's rain. The air smelled like wet concrete and the faint sweetness of the bakery 2 blocks over. For a moment, I thought about walking there, not for the pastry, but for the act of going. Then I decided I didn't need a reason at all. When I stepped outside, I realized how rare it had become for me to check over my shoulder. How, without noticing, I'd stopped scanning doorways and faces. The ground under me no longer felt like something that could give way without warning. I walked toward the park. The early light caught in the branches, and for a second, I stood still, letting it settle over me. I thought about all the years I'd treated safety as a place you reached and locked yourself inside. Now, it felt like something I carried, not a shelter I had to guard, but a ground that moved with me wherever I went. Maybe that's what healing is. Not just learning to stand again, but learning that the earth will hold you when you do. I kept walking, not toward anything in particular, just far enough to remind myself the world was open. By the time I reached the far side of the park, the city was waking up. Dog walkers with leashes tangled like rope, a runner in a neon jacket, someone carrying a paper bag of fresh bread, steam still curling from the top. I stopped at a bench I hadn't sat on in years. Back then, it had been a vantage point, a place to watch without being seen, to read the angles of strangers and decide who might matter, who might be a threat. Today, I just sat, not reading anyone, not guarding anything. The air was cool against my face, the kind that makes you breathe a little deeper without realizing. I noticed a small group of kids kicking a ball across the grass, their laughter carrying farther than it should in the open air. One of them tripped, fell, and then laughed harder than the rest. No one rushed in to rescue him. He didn't need rescuing. It hit me that this was what I'd been relearning, how to exist without rushing to brace, without rehearsing the worst before it came. The world wasn't pushing back anymore, or maybe it never had. Maybe I'd just stopped pushing against it. Safety, I realized, isn't a wall. It's the moment you stop needing one. I stayed on that bench longer than I planned, until the sun warmed the wood beneath me. Then I stood, not because I had to leave, but because I felt ready to keep going. I left the park by a path I'd never taken before. It curved behind a row of brick houses, past gardens that looked more lived in than landscaped, wildflowers leaning into the sidewalk, herbs spilling over raised beds. I slowed down, letting my steps match the pace of the morning. No calls to return, no deadline pulling me forward. Just the quiet pleasure of being unhurried. Halfway down the block, I passed a man fixing a fence. He glanced up, nodded once, and I nodded back. No small talk, no expectation, just the easy recognition of two people existing in the same moment. I didn't realize how far I'd walked until I reached the edge of the waterfront. The tide was out, leaving wet sand patterned with the imprints of shells and gull tracks. The air smelled briny, and the sound of water lapping against the pilings was steady enough to feel like breathing. I stood there for a while, watching a single sailboat ease out into the open water. No hurry in its movement, no visible rush to be anywhere else. And I thought, maybe this is the point. To live like the tide, not always rushing in or pulling away, but letting yourself be exactly where you are until it's time to move. I turned back toward home, not because the walk was over, but because it felt like the right place to end it today. When I stepped back onto my street, the afternoon light had shifted. Warmer now, stretching shadows long across the pavement. The house looked the same as when I'd left, but it felt different, like it had been holding a place for me. Inside, the familiar hum returned. Ava's music drifting from upstairs, the clink of a spoon in a mug somewhere in the kitchen. Liam appeared in the hallway. "Where'd you go?" "For a walk," I said. "Long one." "Yeah," I replied. It was good. He didn't ask for more, didn't press for a story. And I realized, not every return needs an explanation. Not every ending needs to tie itself into something neat. Some days end the way a good song fades out, not with a final note, but with the sense that it could start again at any moment. Maybe that's what living is now. Not the chase for closure, but the comfort of knowing I don't need it to keep going. I hung my jacket, took a deep breath, and let the rest of the day happen without asking it to prove anything. The sun had just dipped low enough to paint the walls gold when Ava wandered into the kitchen. She rummaged in the fridge, pulled out a carton of strawberries, and began eating them one by one without washing them first. "You know that's a health hazard," I said. She shrugged. "So is half the stuff you cook." I laughed, and it was the easy kind. The kind that didn't feel like clearing smoke from a room. Liam joined us a minute later, dropping his keys on the counter and stealing a strawberry before Ava could protest. No plans were made. No one mentioned dinner. We just stayed there, leaning against the counter, letting the conversation move in small, unhurried circles, about a song Ava liked, about the weather turning, about nothing important, the kind of talk that doesn't need to lead anywhere, the kind that says, "We're here, together, that's enough." And it was. I thought about how rare this used to be, not just the stillness, but the absence of any need to fill it with proof of love or loyalty. Now, it was simply lived. Maybe real connection isn't built in grand gestures. Maybe it's built in kitchens, over unwashed strawberries, in the space where no one's trying too hard. When the bowl was empty, Ava tossed the stems in the sink, and for a moment, the room felt like it had a pulse. Not from noise, from presence. After Ava left the kitchen, Liam lingered for a while, leaning against the counter with his arms folded. We didn't talk much, just exchanged a few stray comments about the game he was planning to watch later. Then he said something almost offhand. "It's different here now." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "Feels lighter," he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. Then he grabbed his water bottle and headed upstairs. I stayed there, letting the words settle. He hadn't said "you're different" or "we're okay now." He'd said "here," as if the house itself had exhaled. And maybe it had, maybe walls remember, the raised voices, the slammed doors, the footsteps that used to carry the weight of suspicion. Now they were holding something else. Quiet laughter, the shuffle of chairs at dinner, the rhythm of a life no longer braced for impact. I stepped into the living room and noticed the small things. Ava's sketchbook left open, Liam's hoodie tossed over the arm of the couch, a half-finished puzzle on the coffee table. Not mess. Evidence. The real ending to any fight isn't the moment you win. It's the moment the place you live forgets there was a war at all. I sat down, and for the first time in years, I felt like this house, and this life, could carry me without my constant grip on the wheel. I stayed in the living room for a long time, not doing anything, just letting the evening stretch. The window was cracked open, and a faint breeze carried in the scent of rain from the afternoon. Somewhere down the street, someone was playing a guitar badly, but even that felt like part of the quiet. I leaned back and closed my eyes. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the strange relief of not needing to watch every doorway, every sound, every shift in the air. For years I'd thought belonging was something you earned, by proving yourself, by being useful, by keeping everyone safe. Now I understood it differently. Belonging wasn't performance. It was what happened when you stopped performing and the place still kept you. Ava came back downstairs, looking for her sketchbook. She didn't ask why I was sitting in the dark. She just found it, gave me a quick glance, and said, "Don't forget to eat later," before heading back up. No ceremony, no questions. Just a life moving around me, trusting I was part of it. Maybe this is the truest measure of home. Not that you hold on to it, but that it holds on to you, even when you're still. Later that night, I found myself in the kitchen, standing at the edge of the light spilling from the overhead lamp. Liam was already at the table with a plate of leftovers, and without thinking, I sat down across from him. He didn't pause mid-bite, didn't look at me like my presence was unusual. He just slid the salt shaker toward me, like this was routine. We ate without rush, small comments here and there, about the neighborhood getting quieter, about a player he thought should have been traded months ago. Nothing heavy, nothing sharp. But halfway through, it hit me. For years, I'd been circling the table, always busy, always standing, never letting myself just sit and share the space. Now, I was here. Not as a visitor, not as someone trying to earn his chair. Just here. When we were done, Liam stacked his plate on mine and said, "Good night, Dad," before heading upstairs. And I sat for another minute, hands resting on the table, feeling the quiet hum in the wood. Maybe healing doesn't announce itself in big moments. Maybe it's just the night you sit down again and realize no one's waiting for you to get up. The house settled into silence after everyone went to bed. Not the kind that feels empty, the kind that breathes. I stayed downstairs a while longer, the only light coming from the lamp by the couch. Shadows stretched across the floor, the faint sound of rain tapping against the window again. I thought about how many nights I'd spent like this in the past, but with my mind spinning, replaying every argument, every loss, every move I should have made differently. Tonight my mind was still, not blank, just steady. I noticed the sound of Ava's footsteps upstairs, the muffled closing of Liam's bedroom door, the cat padding softly through the hall. Ordinary sounds, but to me, they were proof. Proof that the house had its own rhythm now, one I didn't have to control for it to stay intact. I leaned back, letting the quiet settle around me like a blanket I hadn't realized I'd been cold without. Sometimes the clearest sign you've made it through isn't that the noise has stopped, it's that you've stopped needing to fight it. When I finally switched off the lamp and climbed the stairs, the house didn't feel like something I had to guard. It felt like something guarding me. I woke before the sun, not with the jolt of an alarm, but with the slow ease of someone who knows the ground beneath him isn't going anywhere. The house was still, the kind of stillness that doesn't feel fragile, more like the pause between deep breaths. I moved quietly down the stairs, making coffee while the first light began to edge its way through the kitchen window. The steam curled upward in the soft gold, and I caught myself smiling without a reason. For years, mornings had been a race, to gather evidence, to prepare for the fight, to get ahead of the next blow. Now, there was nothing to get ahead of. Just the day itself, waiting without demand. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around the mug, and let the quiet fill the space where urgency used to live. Ava came in, half awake, and instead of rushing past, she sat down across from me, stealing a sip from my cup. No words at first, just the comfort of starting the day in the same place. Maybe this is what arrival feels like, not the victory lap, but the moment you realize you don't need to run anymore. The coffee cooled, the light grew, and for the first time in a long time, the day felt like it belonged to us before it even began. After Ava left to get ready for her day, I stayed at the table. The mug was nearly empty, but I wasn't in a hurry to refill it. I watched the way the light shifted across the wall, slow, deliberate, like it had all the time in the world. It struck me how rare this used to be. Not just the quiet, but the knowledge that it would be here again tomorrow, and the day after that. For years, I'd lived like peace was something that arrived once, in a flash, and then vanished if you weren't careful. I'd treated it like a rare guest, welcomed, but never trusted to stay. Now, I was beginning to understand it differently. Peace wasn't an event. It was a pattern, one that built itself in mornings like this, when nothing needed saving, and no one was keeping score. Liam wandered in, still half asleep, and dropped into the chair next to me. He didn't say good morning, just reached for the cereal box and started eating straight from it. I didn't scold him. I didn't tell him to hurry. I just let it be another thread in the quiet fabric of the day. The real luxury isn't the rare moment of calm. It's knowing you'll get to have it again. And I realized, as he poured the cereal back into the bowl without spilling a grain, that I was already looking forward to tomorrow. When Liam finished eating, he left the bowl in the sink without a word. It should have been one of those small irritations that pile up, but today, it just made me smile. He was comfortable enough to leave things undone, and I was steady enough not to mind. After he went upstairs, I glanced toward the drawer in the hall, the one where I'd kept the folded list. The paper had been sitting there for weeks now, quietly waiting. I opened the drawer, took it out, and unfolded it on the kitchen table. The lighthouse, the diner, the cabin, and the last thing I'd added, go somewhere without telling anyone first. I traced my finger down the page, feeling the weight of possibilities I hadn't touched yet. The comfort of these mornings made me realize something. If you know you can come back to steady ground, you're free to step away from it. I circled one item, the lighthouse, and slid the list into my jacket pocket. No announcement, no big decision. Just a quiet promise to myself that one of these days, maybe soon, I'd follow that line on the paper and see where it led. Security isn't the opposite of movement. It's what makes movement possible. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to let my life stretch a little farther than the walls of this house. I didn't tell anyone about the lighthouse. Not because it was a secret, but because I liked the idea of carrying it quietly, like a stone in my pocket, weight enough to remind me it was real. The day moved on as usual. Ava left for class. Liam disappeared into his room, the sound of a game drifting under his door. I answered a few emails, paid a bill, watered the plant on the windowsill that somehow hadn't died. Every so often my mind would drift back to the list. I could almost hear the gulls, feel the damp wind coming off the water. The image wasn't sharp, but it was enough to pull at me in a way nothing had for years. In the past, I would have turned that pull into an action plan immediately. Booked the trip, mapped the route, made sure it was useful or necessary before letting myself want it. This time, I didn't rush. I let the idea sit, the way you let bread rise, slowly, quietly, until it's ready to become something. Not every step forward needs a drumbeat. Some are better taken in silence, until the ground beneath you starts to tilt toward them on its own. By evening, I still hadn't made a single move toward the lighthouse. But I knew, and maybe that was enough for today, that I was going. The next morning, I woke with the lighthouse in my head. Not in a restless way, but like a faint beacon I could see even with my eyes closed. I went through the motions of the day, making coffee, reading the news, listening to Ava tell me about a project she was working on. But everything felt slightly different. Lighter. As if my life had a subtle forward lean. I didn't need to talk about it, didn't need to justify it. The knowledge that I'd set my sights on something, anything, was enough to shift the air around me. While I washed the dishes, I caught myself humming. It startled me. I couldn't remember the last time I'd done that without thinking. The lighthouse wasn't an escape. It wasn't about running from here. It was about moving towards something that had nothing to do with survival, and everything to do with choice. Sometimes the most powerful change you can make isn't the one you announce. It's the one you quietly start living like it's already decided. By the afternoon, I realized the truth. Whether I went tomorrow or next month, I was already on my way. Later that day, I ran a few errands. Nothing remarkable. Groceries, hardware store, a stop at the post office. But in each place, something caught my eye. At the market, a magazine cover with a photograph of a rocky coastline under a gray sky. At the hardware store, a row of brass compasses hanging by the register. Even the post office had a postcard display, one card showing a tall, white lighthouse against a stormy ocean. I didn't go looking for any of it, but there it was, as if the world had started nudging me in the direction I'd already chosen. I bought the postcard without thinking. When I got home, I propped it against the lamp on my desk. It wasn't motivation. It wasn't a countdown. It was just a reminder that the thing I wanted existed beyond my imagination. Ava noticed it that evening. "Where's that?" "Somewhere I might go," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Vacation?" "Something like that." She didn't press, and I didn't explain. When you set your course quietly, the world has a way of speaking to you in small, steady echoes. And with every echo, I felt the trip becoming less of a maybe, and more of a certainty already in motion. The postcard stayed on my desk for 3 days before I touched it again. Not because I forgot, but because I liked catching it in the corner of my eye while I worked. One morning, while making coffee, I opened the kitchen drawer where I keep my old camera. I hadn't used it in years. Phone pictures had taken over. But I knew the lighthouse deserved more than a quick snapshot. I set the camera on the counter. Didn't check the battery. Didn't dig out the lenses. Just let it sit there like a silent passenger already waiting for the trip to start. That day, I also found myself noticing my jacket, the one with deep pockets, good for holding a notebook, a map, or nothing at all. I brushed the dust from the shoulders without putting it on. None of this was preparation in the strict sense. It was more like making space, in my mind, in my home, for the thing I was moving toward. Sometimes you start the journey just by making room for it. By the time I went to bed, I hadn't booked a ticket, hadn't circled a date, but I could feel it. The trip had already begun in ways no calendar could track. The next evening, Ava was in the kitchen sketching while I made dinner. She glanced at the old camera still sitting on the counter. "You taking pictures again?" she asked. "Thinking about it," I said. She kept drawing. "Of what?" I hesitated, then shrugged. "Haven't decided yet." It wasn't a lie, not exactly. I hadn't decided which pictures I'd take, just that there was one place I wanted the first roll to belong to. A little later, Liam came in, phone in hand, talking about some documentary he'd watched. It was about shipwrecks off the Atlantic coast. "Those lighthouses are insane," he said. "Imagine living out there, middle of nowhere." I felt a flicker in my chest, the quiet recognition of the path I was on, but I just said, "Yeah, must be something." We ate together without pushing the topic further. But I caught myself picturing the sound of waves against the rocks, the beam of light cutting through the dark. Sometimes you don't have to announce where you're going. It's enough to let it drift into the air, so the people around you start to feel it too. That night, the postcard on my desk felt less like a secret, and more like something the house itself was now keeping with me. Over the next few days, nothing dramatic happened. No big reveal, no sudden announcement, but the air in the house felt different, like we were all leaning towards something, even if only I knew what it was. I caught Ava lingering by the postcard once, her eyes tracing the lighthouse like it was a place she'd seen before. She didn't ask. She just straightened it so it stood upright again. Liam, out of nowhere, mentioned that the weather was supposed to be clearer on the coast this time of year. I didn't ask how he knew. I just stored the fact away, like another small thread tying me to where I was headed. Even I moved differently, quieter, slower, but not with hesitation. It was the calm that comes when you know your next step, and you're in no rush to take it. A plan doesn't have to shout to change you. Sometimes it's enough that it hums in the background, tuning everything else to its rhythm. By the end of the week, I realized something. The lighthouse wasn't just calling me anymore. It was already part of this house, part of the story we were all quietly telling without words. That night, I sat at my desk with the postcard in one hand and my notebook in the other. For the first time, I started jotting down what I wanted from the trip. Not logistics, not dates or routes, but the kind of moments I hope to carry home. A morning where the air smells like salt before I even open my eyes. The sound of water moving under the floorboards of a dock. The way light bends when it hits the glass at the top of the tower. I wasn't trying to collect souvenirs. I wanted textures, pieces of a place that could live here with me when I returned. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew the lighthouse wouldn't change my life, but it might change the way I looked at the one I already had. Sometimes you don't go to leave something behind. You go so you can bring a better version of it back. I set the postcard back against the lamp, closed the notebook, and felt a quiet certainty in my chest. Whatever I found there, it would follow me home. In the mornings now, I've started taking my coffee to the back porch. It's not the ocean, but if I close my eyes, the breeze through the trees almost carries a hint of salt. I let myself imagine the horizon stretching farther than my eyes can reach. Some days, I'll bring the old camera out with me. I don't take pictures yet. I just hold it, getting used to the weight in my hands again. The lens is still dusty, but I like the ritual of brushing it clean, like I'm rehearsing for the real thing. Even in the middle of the day, I catch myself looking for light, how it cuts across the floor, how it slides along the edge of a window frame. I think about the beam of a lighthouse, how it must feel to stand inside it, watching it sweep across water and sky. Sometimes you start the journey by learning how to see differently where you already are. By evening, when the porch goes quiet except for the hum of distant traffic, I realize something. I'm not waiting for the trip to start anymore. In a way, it already has. One afternoon, while tidying the living room, I stopped at the coffee table where the half-finished puzzle still sat. Ava's sketchbook was beside it, pencil tucked neatly inside. Liam's hoodie was draped over the back of the couch. I didn't move any of it. Not because I was being sentimental, but because I wanted to come back to find it all exactly as it was. Proof that life here had gone on while I was away. In the past, I would have packed the days before a trip with checklists, making sure every surface was cleared, every loose end tied, as if I had to freeze the house in a perfect state so nothing could go wrong in my absence. Now, I saw it differently. I didn't want to come home to a stage set. I wanted to return to a place mid-breath, still warm from the people who lived in it. Home isn't what you protect from change. It's what you get to step back into, even after you've been somewhere else. I set my jacket over the arm of the couch, one more thing to leave waiting for me, and felt a small, quiet thrill at the thought that soon I'd be walking back through that door with the sea still clinging to my skin. The next morning, I woke with the sense that something had tipped forward. Not dramatically, no sudden decision or flash of urgency, just a quiet awareness that the trip was no longer a thing I was going to do someday. It was already leaning into the present. I made coffee, and without really thinking about it, I pulled the jacket from the couch arm and checked the pockets. Notebook, pen, the postcard from my desk, all there. I slid the old camera into its case and set it near the door. Not because I was leaving today, but because I wanted to start living as if I could. Ava passed through the kitchen on her way out. She glanced at the camera, then at me. "You going somewhere?" "Eventually," I said. She smiled, not surprised, not curious, just like she already knew. Sometimes the moment you truly begin isn't when you walk out the door, but when the things you'll take with you start waiting by it. I finished my coffee standing by the window, watching the light change on the street, and thought, it's close now. Close enough to touch. By late afternoon, the light outside had that restless quality it gets before a storm. Not dark, but charged, as if the air itself was leaning forward. I found myself pacing a little, not from impatience, but from the quiet energy of knowing that soon I'd be on the move. It wasn't the kind of trip you rush for. It was the kind you let rise until it's ready. I sat on the porch with my jacket draped over my lap, listening to the sound of cars passing at the end of the street. Each one felt like a reminder that the road was always there, threading its way out of the city toward the places where the land falls away into water. I pictured the first mile, not the destination, just the hum of tires, the blur of trees, the way my breathing might settle into the rhythm of forward motion. It didn't feel like leaving. It felt like taking this steadiness with me and letting it see more of the world. The road doesn't have to be a break from home. Sometimes it's a way of carrying home farther than it's ever been. I stayed there until the air cooled against my skin, feeling the trip stretch toward me, close enough now that I could almost hear the waves. That night, after the house went still, I sat at my desk with the calendar open in front of me. No one had asked when I was going. No one had pushed for details. but the days on the page felt like they'd been waiting for me to make a mark. I didn't overthink it. I didn't cross-check the weather or look up tides. I just let my eyes settle on a date that felt right, far enough to keep it gentle, close enough to keep it real. I drew a small circle around the number, not a bold X, not a highlight, just a quiet shape to hold the promise. When I closed the calendar, I felt something shift inside me, a line between someday and soon that I'd finally stepped across. I slipped the postcard into my jacket pocket. It was no longer just a reminder. It was part of the kit, part of what I'd carry with me when the car rolled out of the driveway. Plans don't always need fanfare. Sometimes the only witness is you, and that's enough to make them real. I went to bed without telling anyone, but I slept with the easy weight of knowing the lighthouse had a date now. In the days after I circled the date, nothing about my routine changed, at least not in ways anyone else would notice. I still made coffee in the mornings, still lingered on the porch, still let Ava and Liam's small conversations fill the house like background music. But underneath it all, there was a steady undercurrent, the quiet awareness that each sunrise brought me one step closer to the drive. I didn't pack, didn't map the route, didn't even check the forecast. The plan was already living in my bones. It didn't need lists to prove it was happening. Some nights, I'd catch myself glancing at the calendar, not to double-check the date, but to feel the small pulse of recognition, almost. And every so often, when the air was just right, I'd swear I could hear the faint rhythm of waves far beyond the city. Sometimes the sweetest part of going somewhere is living in the space between deciding and departing. The day was coming, and when it did, I knew I'd be ready, not because I'd prepared perfectly, but because I'd been quietly walking toward it all along. The morning of the trip came without ceremony. No packed bags by the door, no goodbyes that sounded like departures, just the steady rhythm of coffee brewing, the same creak of the stair under my left foot, and the jacket waiting on the hook. I slipped the postcard into my pocket, felt the weight of the old camera on my shoulder, and stepped outside. The air was cool, but not sharp, the kind that wakes you up without making you brace. The drive was long enough for the world to change slowly. City blocks gave way to open fields, fields to pine forests, and then finally, the first flash of water catching the sun. When I saw the lighthouse, it wasn't grand or cinematic. It was weathered, its paint chipped by wind and salt, its glass steady and unblinking. I climbed the narrow steps to the top, the beam sweeping out over an ocean that seemed to breathe in its own time. I stood there until I understood. I hadn't come to find something I was missing. I'd come to see what I already carried, the steadiness, the quiet, the light that didn't need a storm to matter. When I drove home, the lighthouse stayed behind, but its beam felt like it was moving with me, threading back through every mile until the house came into view. Because sometimes the real destination isn't where you end up. It's the person who walks back through the door when you return. And if you've been listening to this story, maybe it's your turn now. Circle your own date, find your own lighthouse, and see what you bring back when you come home.